Chapter 598. Countless unimaginable sword lights were stained with blood and converged into a storm. It seemed to be falling from the sky, but it also seemed to be rising from the plains. The storm that connected the heavens and the earth howled and tore apart every inch of space. The void was constantly trembling, and one sword's shadow after another covered the sky and the ground. It was plain and natural, but it had an irresistible majesty. Everyone was watching this scene. The sword energy was supreme and arrogant. The sword emperor, who stood in the sky and casually carried this sword intent, meant that he was the most powerful and even the most dominant power in this era. No one was his opponent anymore. All the people in front of him were no longer obstacles. Under the cold sword edge of Jojo, they were all nonentities. An earth-shattering curtain of swords swept over like a storm. The infinite sword energy was getting closer and closer to Mormon's. Mormon's was getting closer and closer to Wang Tianzong. That unparalleled power brought only despair to the people who saw it. Looking at this city, Wang Tianzong was also touched. Because he was standing too high, countless figures became extremely small in his sight. The sword intent roared around him and spread out. The irresistible sharpness appeared in every corner of the wilderness. It was a storm, a tsunami, a thunderbolt, and a surging tide. Wang Tianzong's figure moved forward in the air. He walked into the city. The magnificent sword light swept through the city at the same time. The whole city trembled under the sword intent. The space was torn apart, and more sword lights appeared. The dead void spread everywhere, and the earth was torn apart. The infinite sword intent drew hideous cracks on the ground. In the broken city, countless buildings fell down one after another. In the chaotic roar, countless people died. The people who had no time to retreat fell down in large numbers. Snow Country, Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Samsara Palace, Mormon's Purgatory seemed to come alive in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was dyed by a blood-red color. Wang Tianzong looked down at the city and watched the sword light raging in the city. A city, a country, a grass, and a tree were all under the North Sea sword. Wang Tianzong looked calm, but the light in his eyes became obviously relaxed. It was not until this moment that he was finally sure that he had completely crossed the almost impossible chasm and truly stood at the supreme height. No one was his opponent. Deity couldn't. The master of Samsara Palace could not do that. Lin Fengting couldn't. Even if everyone attacked together, it wouldn't work. His condition was perfect, and it could even be said that it was unprecedented. The world was quiet and so fragile. With a sword in his hand, he could sweep the entire dark world. The coldness of the 9 states trembled violently behind him, and its fighting spirit soared into the sky. Wang Tianzong lowered his head. That day was destined to be the most glorious peak of the Wang family of Beihai in hundreds of years. From this moment on, everything on Mount Dibing in Beihai would be supreme like the sword light in his hand. As long as he was there, all the glory in front of him would never fall. Did you see that? Wang Tianzong muttered to himself, I did it. From today on, the Wang family of Beihai will become the only will of the dark world. Do you see? No one heard his words clearly, and no one would know who he was referring to when he said, you guys. His eyes scanned the city below. An incomparably sharp sword light boiled in the center of the city, its sharpness soaring into the sky. Wang Tianzong looked at him quietly. After many years, deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital took off his black robe and mask. The ridiculously large sickle was held tightly in his hand. His face was pale, and his appearance was not handsome. But at this moment, his figure became the most real sword light in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Wang Tianzong's figure slowly fell. As he fell, countless sword energy under his feet were dropped in an instant. The invisible sword shadow made a sharp collision sound. Countless sword energy was compressed into one place, and the storm turned into a blood-colored column. As Wang Tianzong fell, it became shorter and more condensed. Deity waved his sickle. The sword energy, which used to be the sharpest in the dark world, became pure defense. His palm began to make a seal. Behind him, nearly 1,000 remaining elites of Daybreak, Dawn, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were making seals. With deity's sword energy beyond the peak of the invincible realm as the core. Everyone's sword energy gathered toward deity's body at the same time. All-embracing collection. Life-prolonging immortality. Deity stood at the forefront of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The light, which seemed to be completely burning, burst out in an instant and covered everyone in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Wang Tianzong in the air seemed to make a sound, simple and without any emotion. The red storm of sword intent compressed as he fell, and the ground began to tremble. His voice rang out, resounding throughout the city, indifferent and soothing. "I gave you a chance," he said quietly. When the notice of the Wang family of Beihai spread throughout Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong's will had been expressed very clearly. They all surrendered or died under the sword of Beihai. No one chose to surrender. So, Wang Tianzong's voice was calm. "Go to hell." His falling figure stagnated in the air and stopped at a height that everyone could see. The majestic sword energy, which had been compressed to the extreme, exploded in all directions like a cannonball. The sound was earth-shattering. In an instant, the entire street was completely overturned by the sword. In the complete chaos, a large amount of dust was flying. The almost world-destroying sword light swept directly to the front of the formation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Thousands of people and deity worked together. The strongest immortality seal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, improved by the 24 moves of sword, was shining. The sword light arrived in an instant. Without the slightest delay, there was no sign of obstruction. The unimaginable sword light directly toward the defense of the immortality seal. The sword light was surging. The city was collapsing. Nearly 1,000 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were lifted into the sky by the sword. Countless people seemed to want to struggle. The lightning and the raging fire lit up for a moment. Then the sword light rushed over. In an instant, the whole street was quiet. Blood was spilled in the sword energy, and the flesh and blood were torn into powder. Countless elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital disappeared completely in this sword. Under the surging sword energy, deity's body was directly lifted up by the sword energy, flew nearly 100 meters in the air, and fell heavily behind him. Daybreak and Dawn were protected behind him. He could only protect the two of them. His body fell in a ruin 100 meters away. Smoke and dust were flying wildly. He struggled to stand up and raised the huge sickle in his hand, which was not a murderous weapon but was equally sharp. Crack, the sickle broke at the moment he raised it. Before the broken weapon fell to the ground, it had turned into dust and was flying everywhere. At this moment, everyone's heart became extremely cold. Everyone knew that Wang Tianzong was very strong. But perhaps no one could imagine that Wang Tianzong could be so strong, except for the master of Samsara Palace. He was a perfect chosen one. Even in Li Tianlan's mind, he could only get the conclusion that he was far beyond deity. But how much was the so-called far beyond? Now when he really showed it, the absurd feeling of being in a nightmare almost made him completely suffocate. Deity naturally did not expect that Wang Tianzong would be so strong. He gained something on the night of the trial day and finally broke through to the peak of the invincible realm yesterday. He could vaguely see the end now, and he seemed to be only half a step away from the real chosen one. Even if he was not really at his peak now. But when he was prepared and gathered nearly 1,000 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to form a formation, when the immortality formation was fully exerted, his defense could not be so fragile. But now the result was extremely naked in front of deity. The immortality formation was broken. Wang Tianzong only made one move. No. Wang Tianzong did not even draw his sword. Even a fool knew that the Sword Emperor without a sword and the Sword Emperor with a sword were two completely different states. Deity looked at the metal powder in his hand dully. He raised his head little by little and looked at Wang Tianzong in the air. A mouthful of blood sprayed from his mouth, and his aura directly declined. The Beihai core was cheering almost crazily. Everyone's face was completely distorted, and they almost completely lost their minds. An invisible sword intent completely protected them in it. They were in the safest position, looking up at the man in the ancient costume who looked like an emperor in the air, and their eyes were full of fanaticism. That was their majesty, the strongest foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, and the supreme deity in all of their hearts. When he stood on the top of the world, everyone in the Wang family of Beihai also stood on the top. This was a real glory that could not be described in any words. At this moment, standing on the battlefield that was still fighting, many iron-blooded soldiers in the Beihai Corps, who dared to rush forward against the sword intent of deity and dared to fight with anyone regardless of their life and death, had tears in their eyes. It was not because their majesty had become the chosen one. It was because the current chosen one was their majesty of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong glanced at deity. He took a step forward. That simple step seemed to have crossed half a street block. Hundreds of meters away, Wang Tianzong was already standing in front of deity. His figure was suspended in the air, looking down at deity, who had a weak aura. Deity looked up at him. He was not used to looking up at anyone in his life. He did not want anyone to be above him. If not, he would not have tried to drag down the entire Wang family of Beihai. But now, Wang Tianzong was standing on his head. This feeling was clearer than it had been many years ago. He looked up and could only see the soles of Wang Tianzong's shoes. The strong sense of shame made his eyes bloodshot, and his expression became more paranoid and silent. Wang Tianzong looked at him. There was a long silence. He finally spoke. His calm voice resounded throughout the city, as if he was telling the world a truth that had been hidden for many years. I have been waiting for this day for many years. His voice was quiet, with a little tiredness. It was the melancholy after waiting for a long time. When I saw you more than 3 years ago, I wanted to kill you. Until now, the thing I want to do most after the breakthrough is to kill you. Do you know what it is? Deity did not speak. In his silence, Wang Tianzong revealed the answer to the mystery. It's been a long time, Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu. 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 His voice was clear and light, rolling through the whole city, but like a thunder, it suddenly exploded in everyone's ears. Li Tianlan, who had just entered the manor, suddenly looked up and looked into the distance. He stood in the manor, and countless white mist moved with his figure. The vague mist did not affect his vision at all. Everything in front of him was extremely clear. Li Kuangtu. The Li family. Li Kuangtu. He looked up in that direction in a daze. For a moment, he seemed to have lost all his soul. Everyone around him was looking at him. Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Lin Yuxian opened his mouth wide, and his face was full of disbelief. Lin Fengting sighed softly. The master of Samsara Palace stood where she was, and no one knew what she was thinking. Flaming Fire was still expressionless. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's back and was a little worried. Countless emotions surged in his heart, from childhood, to adolescence to the present. The hardships he had suffered, the tears he had shed, the happiness he had, and the treasures he had lost. Countless emotions kept gathering and turning into an extremely abstract and complicated word. Father. He thought of the trial day. At that time, the man who was still deity stood in front of him and said that the Li family was his Li family. He stood there in a daze, looking in the direction where the sword energy broke out. If you didn't die, why didn't you come back after so many years? If you really didn't die, why did you watch the Li family fall to such a level? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. If you are really alive, of course, the Li family is yours. But what position do I have in your heart? Li Tianlan suddenly felt that he was very pitiful. In everyone's eyes, he was really pitiful. Li Tianlan took a step forward. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace appeared in front of him. Li Tianlan looked at him. After a long time, he laughed. You, he looked at the master of Samsara Palace, looked at Flaming Fire, looked at Qin Weibai, and looked at Lin Fengting. His eyes seemed to be burning. You, already knew. The master of Samsara Palace did not answer this question, but calmly asked, "Where are you going?" "He is there." "Of course, I have to go there." Li Tianlan continued to walk. "You can't go." The master of Samsara Palace's tone was indifferent and cold. There seemed to be needles hidden in his eyes. His eyes were flowing and sharp. "If I don't let you go, you can't go anywhere." Li Tianlan ignored him and continued to move forward. An incomparably solid domain appeared around him. The surrounding space suddenly compressed and completely froze him in place. The 10th unique domain. This was the most powerful unique technique of Kunlun City. Ironically, the 10th unique domain built by the master of Samsara Palace was even more powerful than the 10th unique domain of Gu Xingyun, the strongest in Kunlun City. Li Tianlan struggled violently and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him coldly. "You stay here," she said quietly. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the area where the sword intent gathered. There was no echo in that area. In an angle that Li Tianlan could not see, Deity slowly stood up. Dawn had been seriously injured and was in a coma. Daybreak, who was slightly stronger and was about to enter the invincible realm, struggled. Deity reached out and pulled him up. When their palms touched each other, Daybreak's wrist trembled slightly. A faint shadow flew out of his hand and fell on Deity's hand. That was the murderous weapon of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The shadow was torn. Wang Tianzong watched this scene quietly. Facing the murderous weapon, facing Deity. There was no fluctuation in his eyes. "How do you want to die?" He looked at Deity, calm and heartless. The sword strike just now had fully explained his attitude. More than half of the formation of thousands of people from the purgatory of Heaven Capital was killed by his sword strike. At this moment, the two men, who had supported each other through trials and tribulations and laughed together for many years, met again after falling out. The so-called beauty had long disappeared. The past was like the wind. Only the resentment of the past remained and fermented to this day. Deity took a step forward. "I don't accept it." His voice was low, a little ferocious and twisted. "In terms of talent and perseverance, I'm not worse than you. If it weren't for her, how could I?" His voice was directly interrupted by Wang Tianzong. "There are not so many ifs." His voice was cold and cruel. "If these ifs really exist, ignoring those opportunities and luck, you may not be worse than me today. But if those things did not happen, she will not be worse than you today." Li Guangtu laughed with an extremely complicated expression. He looked at Wang Tianzong with some pity and sympathy in his eyes. So what if he was the chosen one? There would always be times when he was helpless. He said softly and very slowly, "There is not much time left for the summer solstice, right?" Wang Tianzong's eyes suddenly condensed. Li Guangtu had already taken a step forward. His body suddenly rose. In an instant, the majestic sword intent suddenly burst out with his body as the center. The sword light was surging, mighty and mighty. Li Guangtu's figure disappeared. A 1,000-meter-long sword suddenly flew across the sky and chopped toward Wang Tianzong. This sword was extremely heavy and simple without any fancy. But when the giant sword flew across the sky, it was incomparably majestic. Before the shock caused by Deity's true identity dissipated, everyone saw this sword. Many people also recognized this sword. This was not the sword of the Li family. It was the Wang Dao sword of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's eyes had become extremely cold. The giant sword was spreading with the condensed sword energy. The tip of the sword, which was much larger than his body, appeared directly in front of him. Wang Tianzong raised his hand expressionlessly. He lifted something heavy as if it were light. It could even be said that it was effortless. He held his hand for a while. Crack. The blood light permeated the night sky. The whole space seemed to be broken in an instant by the pull of a big hand. The giant sword broke into countless pieces. Li Guangtu's body fell from the sky, covered in blood. Li Kuangtu stood up with difficulty and looked at Wang Tianzong in the air. It was not until this moment that he understood how far the half-step distance between the half-step Supreme Master and the Supreme Master was. The so-called half-step distance had exceeded the distance from the Qi-controlling realm to the peak of the invincible realm. But what about him? He was still laughing, extremely comfortable. Wang Tianzong's expression was a little cold. Are you provoking me? Li Kuangtu spat out a mouthful of blood with a smile and said softly, I just want to tell the world that even if I die today, even if you are invincible in the world today, it is only you who are invincible, not the swordsmanship of the Wang family of Beihai. His voice was extremely difficult. The swordsmanship of Beihai will also be vulnerable when facing a more powerful force. So the victory or defeat between you and me is not the victory or defeat between the Li family and Beihai. It's just that I'm not as good as you. Now, I'm not as good as you. Only when the dark world sees this clearly will they understand that the Wang family of Beihai is not invincible. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. A bit of dark light came out of his eyes, and his voice was extremely cold. Does it make sense? I'm not the first chosen one in the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. And the Li family has never seen the chosen one. Li Kuangtu laughed. Do you still dare to say this 20 years later? 20 years later, are you sure that the chosen one will still be surnamed Li? Wang Tianzong seemed to be tired of arguing with Li Kuangtu. He still didn't draw his sword. Instead, he raised his hand casually. The whole world seemed to become his vassal at the moment of his breakthrough. Heaven and earth condensed. Space was compressed into a sword. He waved his hand. The night sky lit up for a moment. In an instant, everything in front of everyone flew up and rushed to Wang Tianzong. The blood flowing on the ground rushed up into the sky. Drops of blood gathered and instantly turned into a river of blood across the sky. On both sides of the road, plastic bags stained with blood flew up. A soldier of Snow Country with a broken company nearby had just raised his head, but his head had disappeared. The light plastic bags turned into unparalleled sharp swords, flying and penetrating the chests of all the soldiers nearby and rushing to Wang Tianzong. The drifting smoke and dust were frozen in the air and turned into the shape of swords. The fallen leaves on the ground, the broken steel bars, and the broken rocks. Everything flew up and converged in the same direction. Everything in the world, it was all a sword. Wang Tianzong's palm fell. Everything flew over his body and directly shrouded the figure of God. Countless chaotic objects. Countless sharp and orderly swords. Li Kuangtu's figure was shrouded in them. Endless sword light broke out completely. The sword light was just a little bit at first. As the sword energy broke out, it continued to spread, hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands. The crystal sharp light broke everything and grew endlessly. This was God's counterattack. It was still not the swordsmanship of the Li family. The Wang family of Beihai. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword. The sword rain all over the sky fell and was torn apart by the 6 paths of reincarnation sword. Li Kuangtu's figure was like a mad dragon rushing madly. In the extreme outbreak, he gave up all defense. Thousands of sword energy broke out completely around him in an instant, tearing everything apart. The street was shaking. The night sky was almost completely torn by the sword energy. The torrential sword energy gathered in front of God into a torrent and an ocean, rushing to Wang Tianzong's figure regardless of everything. No one dared to say that Li Kuangtu was not strong. If Wang Tianzong had not broken through, Li Kuangtu could definitely be regarded as the peak combat capability in the dark world. But in front of him, he was the chosen one. Wang Tianzong raised his palm. One punch. A wave of qi broke out between heaven and earth with his body as the center. The endless sword light was completely annihilated. Li Kuangtu's body was blown dozens of meters away by a punch, and his body was covered with blood. But he was still laughing. Laughing wildly. Wantonly. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. He never thought that when he became the chosen one, he would break the 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai with his own hands. He thought of God's words again. I just want to tell the world that even if I die today, even if you are invincible in the world today, you are invincible, not the swordsmanship of the Wang family of Beihai. Damn it. Wang Tianzong looked at the direction where God fell and slowly walked over. Daybreak staggered to his feet and seemed to want to stop him. Wang Tianzong reached out his hand casually and patted him. Bang! The ground suddenly sunk. Daybreak's whole body was pressed directly into the ground, and only his head was exposed. Wang Tianzong did not look at him. He just looked at Li Guangtu, who fell to the ground and stood up again. His sword intent was still condensing. It was still the 6 paths of reincarnation. You didn't choose the way to die. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold, and there seemed to be endless darkness around him. I've made a choice for you. You shouldn't die so easily. He flicked his palm gently. An extremely sharp sword energy arrived in a flash. When Li Guangtu realized something, the sword energy had directly passed through his body. The sword energy he condensed suddenly scattered, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Wang Tianzong's body continued to move forward. One of the 2 men fell to the ground, and the other stood on the ground and looked at each other. No one knew what they were thinking. Maybe they were thinking about the past. But no matter what happened in the past, today. For Li Guangtu, the so-called Sword Emperor was his doomsday. I can stop him. The white mist in the manor kept surging and gathering on Li Tianlan. His body kept struggling in the 10th unique domain. I said I can stop him. Let me go. I can stop him. You can't stop him. The master of Samsara Palace said coldly, I told you that you shouldn't have come here. If you hadn't come, you wouldn't have seen it. Shouldn't come? Li Tianlan stared at the master of Samsara Palace. Why shouldn't I come? What right do you have to order me not to come? I'm here now. Do you want me to watch him die? Do you know who he is to me? Let me go. Bastard, let me go. Do you know who he is to you? The master of Samsara Palace seemed to be extremely mean tonight. Her body was trembling, but it was completely covered by the black robe. All her emotions were shrouded. Her voice was mocking. Do you really know? Li Tianlan's struggle froze for a moment. Deity was Li Guangtu. But he still didn't know and wasn't sure if Li Guangtu was his father. He asked Li Honghe. Li Honghe said no. But anyway, Li Guangtu was Li Honghe's son. Li Guangtu was in Mormons tonight. He was also in Mormons. They were less than 10 kilometers apart. How could he watch Li Guangtu die in front of him? He couldn't do it. He couldn't explain it to his grandfather when he went back. He saved me. Li Tianlan growled in a low voice. Not long ago in Reki City, he saved my life. Now I can save him. Let me go. I won't. The master of Samsara Palace stared into Li Tianlan's eyes. What can you do? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Save him. Even if deity was in his heyday and his sword energy combined with your sword intent, the limit you can reach is at most the state before Wang Tianzong broke through. Maybe you will be a little stronger than the current deity, but is it meaningful? And now deity is seriously injured. If you stand together, you can exert less power. Save him? Why do you save him? Just because you haven't reached the invincible realm? We still have Mr. Lin and you. Lend me a sword, just one sword. I can save him. Li Tianlan gritted his teeth. An extremely intense shame rose from his heart. His red eyes had become a little scattered. Lend him a sword. He was borrowing a sword. He wanted to save Li Guangtu. He wanted to return the favor to Li Guangtu. He wanted to ask his identity face to face. He wanted to ask the relationship between Li Guangtu and himself face to face. He could do all this, but he needed to borrow a sword. Because he didn't have the strength to borrow. To borrow. Just like a beggar, he begged the other party to lend him a sword. Chosen one? It was all bullshit. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly hated the word chosen one. He even needed to borrow a sword. How could he call himself a chosen one? The youngest marshal, the youngest combat capability of the invincible realm, the future chosen one, it was all bullshit. At the most critical moment, he was still Li Tianlan. The future chosen one. It meant that he was nothing now. Li Tianlan was completely sober, but the sense of humiliation was getting stronger. But he still squeezed the words out of his mouth, word by word, frantically, blankly, self-deprecating, and crazily. Lend me your sword, please. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him. Her eyes suddenly softened, as if she felt a little sorry for him. But then she gritted her teeth. So what if I lend you a sword? I still can't stop Wang Tianzong. And that sword? Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and said, the sword that was taken from Lin En. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him. Please. Li Tianlan stared into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace turned around. I'm sorry. That sword is mine, and Mr. Lin is my business partner. You can't convince me, and you can't convince him. I won't lend you anything. She gritted her teeth and said word by word. Okay, then let me go. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. I won't. Let me go, you bitch. I won't let you go, Li Tianlan, you bastard. Bitch, let me go. I won't. Let me go. I won't let you go. Come and kill me. Buzz. A slight buzzing sound suddenly rang out. Li Tianlan moved his wrist slightly. The silver falling stars flew out and turned into a long sword. Lin Fengting walked out of the white mist. What are you arguing about? He held the falling stars and said with a bitter smile. Li Tianlan's mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. The master of Samsara Palace looked to the side in silence, as if she was angry. Lin Fengting raised his hand again. A green light flashed in the white mist. Blue sky underworld also flew out of Li Tianlan's body and fell into Lin Fengting's hand. The two murderous weapons twisted and extended under the stimulation of the sword intent and turned into long swords. The shapes of the two long swords were a little irregular. This was undoubtedly the damage caused by Li Tianlan's failure to detonate the murderous weapon to kill King Tong. Do you know it? Lin Fengting held the blue sky underworld. He looked at Li Tianlan and asked. Li Tianlan glanced at the master of Samsara Palace and didn't say anything. The master of Samsara Palace looked elsewhere and didn't look at him. In the hands of the country, the murderous weapon is the treasure of the country. In the hands of the superpowers, it is also the last trump card. Lin Fengting said slowly, everyone knows that the blue sky underworld belongs to the Samsara Palace, but in fact, this murderous weapon is now yours. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. When the Samsara Palace got the cloud silk robe, he pointed to the master of Samsara Palace. She fought in person and even got it when she was seriously injured. The Samsara Palace lost countless elites, and the two affiliated wealthy families were wiped out. After that, the cloud silk was made into clothes, and the Samsara Palace owed countless favors. He looked at Li Tianlan. That robe is also yours. Everything the Samsara Palace has done, and all the resources in the future are also yours. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. You're a bastard, yes. But you called her a bitch? Lin Fengting laughed. Yes, she's bitch enough. She gave you everything. Isn't that a bitch? Am I right? Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace and didn't say anything. You don't need to apologize. Lin Fengting shook his head. I don't ask you for anything. It's just that it's too late to regret some things. The space in the distance was shaking. Infinite sword intent burst out. The sword energy broke through the sky. Countless sword lights looked real and illusory under the night sky, where light and darkness intertwined. It was flawless. Li Kuangtu's sword energy was completely suppressed and could hardly be felt. That was not a battle at all. Li Tianlan looked in that direction. His body was tense, and his eyes were getting colder and colder. You want to save him? Lin Fengting said, do you know that there were many times when he wanted to kill you? The reason why you didn't die was that the bitch you called him resolved his killing intent. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook, and he looked at the master of Samsara Palace. Really? He asked. I don't talk to bastards. The master of Samsara Palace gritted her teeth and said, don't talk to the bitch either. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He looked at the area where the sword intent was surging and said softly, anyway, he saved me. So you want to save him? Lin Fengting said. Li Tianlan nodded. Even if it's to return a favor. Lin Fengting sighed and looked at the two murderous weapons in his hands. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace again. She doesn't want you to save him, not only because she doesn't want you to take risks, but also because she doesn't think it's worth it. It's not worth it for me to lend you a sword, and it's not worth it to waste the invincible sword. In her heart, Li Kuangtu deserves to die. Not only Li Kuangtu, but anyone who is malicious to you, even if it's just a little bit, deserves to die in her heart. The master of Samsara Palace glanced at him. Lin Fengting, who seemed to have a lot to say, hesitated. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan, and his emotions were complicated and deep. I won't lend you a sword. He looked at the area where Li Tianlan was looking. But we used to be friends. He paused, nodded, and repeated, well, we used to be friends. The three of us, me, Li Kuangtu, Wang Tianzong, and even Summer Solstice, were friends. We used to be. So, he looked at Li Tianlan. Then he looked at the master of Samsara Palace. I'll go. No one knew who he was talking to, and no one knew if he was asking for the master of Samsara Palace's opinion. The master of Samsara Palace said nothing. Silence was a very subtle attitude. Lin Fengting nodded and looked at the murderous weapons in his hand again. I'm no match for Tianzong. If I go, I may lose these two murderous weapons. Are you willing to give them up? At this moment, Li Tianlan thought of Li Honghe. So he nodded and said without hesitation, I'm willing to. Whether it was worth it or not. He was willing to give them up. Because that person was called Li Kuangtu. Lin Fengting sighed softly. His figure suddenly disappeared in the white mist. Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace, who deliberately ignored him. Before he could come up with the right words, an earth-shattering sword light had appeared a few miles away. The resplendent silver light seemed to spread out from the horizon. It was perfectly straight, and its sharpness was astonishing. It was upright. The 24 moves of sword. The break of the sky. Wang Tianzong, who had patiently accumulated injuries for Li Kuangtu again and again, stopped. Looking at the silver light, his eyes became solemn. It was not because of the power of the sword light. It was because of the attitude of the sword light. He stretched out his hand and pointed forward. The extremely faint sword energy collided with the bright silver sharpness. In an instant, all the ruins nearby were completely shattered, and the shock wave with extreme destructive power spread out wildly. In the sound of countless collapses, a drop of blood came out of Wang Tianzong's fingertip. The shining azure light flew over after the silver light and stuck in front of Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu, who was covered in blood and as pale as a dead man, glanced at it and smiled with difficulty. Oh, blue sky underworld. Lin Fengting's figure appeared in front of Li Kuangtu with the silver light. Wang Tianzong stopped. Lin Fengting glanced at him, then at Li Kuangtu, and said in a complicated tone, long time no see. Yeah, long time no see. It's like a lifetime ago. Lin Fengting looked down at the falling stars in his hand and didn't speak. Do you really want to get involved? Wang Tianzong frowned. I'm under the North Sea sword. If I don't surrender, I can only draw my sword to protect myself. Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong and sighed with emotion. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and whispered, "Why don't you go? Leave here, and I won't pursue anything." Now? Lin Fengting laughed. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. "If you give up martial arts, I'll allow you to leave. I'll guard your Lin clan for you from now on." His voice was calm, with the last gentleness. From the moment Lin Fengting appeared in front of him, his current promise was based on the relationship of the past. Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were apologetic, really apologetic. He shook his head with a smile and whispered, "No need." Wang Tianzong looked at him and shook his head little by little. The last gentleness in his tone finally began to disappear. Kuang Tu broke and stood up. "After all, he's not as good as you now. I'm not surprised by your breakthrough, nor am I surprised that you're stronger than him. But you're no match for me, even if you have a murderous weapon." Wang Tianzong's voice was calm and indifferent, like the general trend. "If he can't do it, what about me?" A clear and cold voice sounded in the distance. The voice was still far away at the beginning. But as soon as the voice fell, it had already appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. The white clothes fluttered with a delicate fragrance. Today's madam of the governor of Kunlun City was no longer numb, stiff, or silent. After more than 20 years, she seemed to have returned to the past and restored the nobility and pride when she was the young madam of the Li family. Li Kuangtu glanced at her. Li Shi walked over and helped Li Kuangtu up. Li Kuangtu's body moved, and his voice was hoarse and brief. "Get out. I can't go anywhere." Li Shi looked at Li Kuangtu and smiled softly. "I know you hate me. If you hate me, then hate me. Many years ago, I killed you and owed you a life. Today, I will return it to you." Li Kuangtu shook off Li Shi's arm in disgust. Li Shi didn't mind. She walked to Blue Sky Underworld and looked at Lin Fengting. "Can I?" she asked softly. "Whatever." Lin Fengting was expressionless. Li Shi said, "Oh," and reached out to pull out Blue Sky Underworld. Plain white hand. Dark green sword. They complemented each other. Her white dress flew. She was devastatingly beautiful. Li Kuangtu looked at the red dagger that was still hanging on her waist for many years and reached out to touch the Shadow the Ripper in his hand subconsciously. 2 half-step chosen ones. One was at the peak of the invincible realm. 3 murderous weapons. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. His expression was still indifferent and calm. Just like when he fell from the sky and slaughtered most of the elites of the purgatory of half-heaven. He said, End of this chapter, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 599. The war had stopped. The people fighting in every corner of the city had stopped. Most of the elites of the purgatory of heaven capital were killed by Wang Tianzong's sword light. A small number of survivors were also seriously injured and were trying to gather. The elites of the Samsara Palace quieted down. The elites of the Polar Ground Alliance were retreating. The vast army of Snow Country gradually rushed out of the city. Those who had left had already left. The forces who had no way to retreat still did not give up. They confronted each other and looked forward to the result of the final battle. At this moment, with the exit of Snow Country, the battle standard of the entire Mormons seemed to have once again fallen from a large-scale war to a conflict in the dark world. At this moment, the result of the battle of ordinary elites was almost unimportant in Mormons. The real end was between Wang Tianzong, Li Kuangtu, Lin Fengting, Li Shi, and the 3 murderous weapons. Both the enemy and the enemy. Everyone was looking forward to this battle. The peak of the invincible realm. The half-step Supreme Master. The Supreme Master. 4 people. 3 against 1. No matter what the result of this battle was, it would be the best in this era. Such a scene had never appeared in the dark world for decades, even hundreds of years. The polar ice wind blew through Mormons, bringing with it broken ice and snow. There was a little flying in the deep night. The army was moving, the snow was moving, and time was moving. The rumbling of the general trend continued to roll over, resounding in the ears of every survivor. The sound was so clear, so loud. Everyone seemed to be able to see the general trend pushing forward this era. It was irreversible and powerless to change it. They were all survivors of the dark world. On this day, the chosen one appeared in the Wang family of Beihai, but the whole dark world was withering and heading for the end. Scenes after scenes appeared in front of everyone's eyes when the battle stopped. Thus, everyone clearly realized something. The Wang family of Beihai stood at the center of this battle. After this battle, whether the Sword Emperor won or died, the already barren dark world would usher in a new era in the barren. Some people were looking forward to Wang Tianzong's death. Some people were eager for Wang Tianzong's victory. In the strong expectation, Wang Tianzong took a step forward. "Why don't you draw your sword?" He looked at Lin Fengting and asked emotionlessly. Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. The silver falling star was in his hand, but he did not raise it. All his emotions seemed to be completely restrained, but there was extreme bitterness in the depths of his eyes. Wang Tianzong's eyes became slightly gentle. "When we were young, I told you that you were indecisive and unable to learn how to refuse most of the time. You were destined to be unable to achieve great things." Wang Tianzong whispered. Lin Fengting smiled, extremely free and at ease. Behind the calmness, the real patriarch of the Lin clan seemed to be recovering little by little. He was indifferent and calm. "I don't expect to do anything great. The Lin clan hides from the world. It's enough to protect the achievements of our ancestors. But you didn't hide from the world today. You appeared here." Wang Tianzong looked at him with some regret. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time. He suddenly thought of more than 20 years after the collapse of the Li family. The Li family collapsed in the hands of the Wang family of Beihai. Lin Fengting naturally had complaints in his heart. He and Wang Tianzong met very few times, but every time they met, Wang Tianzong would definitely say those words when they talked about the past. He understood, but he still couldn't understand these 4 words. Now in retrospect, those 4 words were so clear that he could empathize with them. He smiled bitterly. "I can't help it." This was his answer, and it was also the answer that Wang Tianzong once gave him. There was a touch of understanding in Wang Tianzong's eyes. He didn't quite understand the meaning of this word. People in Jianghu. Involuntarily often meant irreparable. He smiled and whispered, "So, don't blame me." Lin Fengting looked at him and didn't speak. Wang Tianzong's gaze was shifting. His gaze fell on Li Shi. The cold wind blew her hair into a mess, and her white dress danced in the wind. She held blue sky underworld in her hand, so proud and so cold. Wang Tianzong's eyes were in a trance for a moment. For more than 20 years, he had hardly seen Li Shi. From the Li family to Kunlun City, thousands of miles away, she seemed to have completely frozen her heart. After the battle that year, all her pride and reserve seemed to be completely broken. She imprisoned herself in Kunlun City for more than 20 years, almost like a prison. And now, in the final battle of Eastern Europe, she held blue sky underworld in her strongest state and was trying her best to piece together the appearance of that year. Wang Tianzong thought of that year. When he saw Li Shi for the first time, he seemed to be attending a dinner party with Li Guangtu in Yuzhou. That night, because of Bai Qingxian, Dongxing Wudi, who was also young, almost fought with Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu seemed to have suffered a small loss. Then at the end of the dinner party, they saw Li Shi. Li Shi, who was dressed up for the first time, was dazzling and almost suppressed all the light of the same sex. Wang Tianzong thought quietly. At that time, Li Guangtu seemed to want to bet with Wang Tianzong on how long it would take to win this woman. How did he answer at that time? 3 days? Or a week? As a result, the next morning, Li Guangtu, with an ambiguous fragrance, appeared in front of him with Li Shi and left him 2 words, "Done." Time flew by in a hurry. Wang Tianzong's greatest impression of Li Shi seemed to be her arrogant and reserved appearance in those days. It's really pitiful. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Shi and said, "Now you want to get back to what you used to be. Do you regret that sword stroke?" Li Shi suddenly held Blue Sky Underworld in her hand, looked at Wang Tianzong, and did not speak. "You have a weak mind and are capricious. Even if a woman like you has the strength, what can you do? You only have yourself to blame for your tragedy." Wang Tianzong continued. "This is my own choice." Li Shi's tone was indifferent. "So you have been making wrong choices all your life. You chose to help him, but Gu Xingyan hoped that you would kill him. When the Li family was the young madam, you helped Kunlun City. Now you are the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, and you want to help the Li family? What are you struggling for?" Li Shi trembled slightly and gritted her teeth without saying a word. "Gu Xingyan is also a good-for-nothing. Don't blame me for always looking down on him. By chance, he stole a high position, complacent and blindly self-abased. With his aptitude, in fact, he could have broken through to the peak of the invincible realm a few years ago, and you are part of his inner demon. After being a dog for a long time, people don't know how to be a man. Kunlun City is the dog of the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. He overthrew the Li family, but he thinks that he has always been inferior to the Li family. He is really stupid and incurable." He took another step forward and looked at Li Guangtu. "You have been stubborn all your life. You can achieve great things, but you can also ruin great things. When I was young, my father told you, but you didn't listen. Now it seems that you have ups and downs, and in the end, you still lost." He did not make any formal evaluation, but just said lightly, "You are not as good as me." He commented on the heroes of the world in a tense situation. Indecisive, capricious, stupid, and good for nothing. You are not as good as me. His words were to the point and made people speechless. The extremely dark light flowed in Li Guangtu's hand and turned into a dark long sword. Li Guangtu held Shadow Ripper tightly and walked to Lin Fengting. "I can still fight," he said quietly. If he could fight, he would not lose. Wang Tianzong said yes again, "You can fight together." The night wind blew the ancient costume on his body. The robe had big sleeves, and on the black cloth, there were traces of golden lines shining with golden light. Wang Tianzong's body began to rise. "It's all under my feet." His voice sounded, resounding through heaven and earth, extremely majestic. Lin Fengting naturally raised his head and looked up at Wang Tianzong, who was getting higher and higher. "I won't blame you." His arms were moving. The falling stars, shining with silver sharpness, rose little by little and pointed to the sky. "No matter what happens today, I hope you won't blame me in the future." Wang Tianzong's body was still rising. Slowly, the endless darkness in the sky gathered toward him wildly. The space was pulled into a cyclone. The wind was not moving forward, and the messy airflow seemed to have lost its direction, turning and circulating in the broken space. The torn space spread all the way. In the nearest place to another block, a team of Samsara Palace elites who were confronting the Polar Ground Alliance suddenly exploded. The blood did not rise or fall, but floated in the air and gradually disappeared. The torn space continued to spread. This time, the supreme sword energy really permeated the whole city. It could be said that the unprecedented sword intent flew over the ruins of the city, rushed out of the wilderness, and went deep into the sea. The glaciers outside the city began to tear and collapse. The calm sea suddenly raised wild waves, rushing and roaring. The white mist in the manor finally stopped gathering toward Li Tianlan. The white mist, which represented vitality, became chaotic and began to evaporate. Finally, it flew toward the other end of the night sky. A vast expanse of whiteness perfectly integrated into Wang Tianzong's sword energy and gathered on him. Wang Tianzong's figure stopped in the sky. At this moment, there was really no opponent in front of him. Army, murderous weapon, peak of the invincible realm, half-step chosen one. The city, the ruins, the vast wilderness, the glacier ocean. They were all under his feet. He looked down. The blue sky underworld spring drew a streak of green light below. The endless darkness surged up with sharp and powerful sword intent. Lin Fengting raised the long sword in his hand. There was a sudden buzzing sound between heaven and earth. Lin Fengting's figure disappeared. A ray of silver sharpness rose to the sky in an instant. The extremely bright silver light was blooming with all its strength. Thousands of rays of sharpness continued to spread toward the sky. In the blink of an eye, the silver light became one. A large expanse of silver light surged and surged. Countless starlights seemed to all light up. The dead city, which was constantly torn apart in the sword energy, became vivid. The extreme silver light went straight up. Through the broken space. Through Wang Tianzong's sword energy. Through the enormous pressure in the void. Up. It was invincible and invincible. The silver light was stretching all over the eyes. From the ground to the sky, it was vast and mighty, like a Milky Way across the sky, flying with indomitable sword intent. The man and the sword became one. At this moment, Lin Fengting had become a ray of sword light. Wherever the sword light passed, even the chosen one's sword intent could not stop it. Broken. Everything was completely broken in the sword light. In Wang Tianzong's domain, which was covered with endless sword intent, a very obvious gap appeared as the silver light passed. The sword light rushed over, shining like stars and shining on the whole city. In an instant, the whole world seemed to be broken. For many years, too many years, even for his whole life. This was the first time that Lin Fengting had fought with all his strength, without any reservation. His sword light was incomparably majestic, with love, chic, and determination. It was incomparably soaring. This was a sword of true feelings. This was an indomitable sword. The endless darkness was completely illuminated by the silver light. All the sharpness seemed to converge in the silver light, all the way up. 24 moves of sword. This was Lin Fengting's own 24 moves of sword. Break of reincarnation. The silver light illuminated the long night and appeared in front of Wang Tianzong with the most dazzling sharpness. Wang Tianzong could no longer see Lin Fengting. The incomparably dazzling sword light was mighty. Wang Tianzong was expressionless. This could be said to be the strongest sword move he had ever seen in his life. This could also be said to be one of the strongest opponents he had ever encountered in his life. At this moment, Lin Fengting indeed surpassed Li Guangtu at his peak. He was even infinitely close to the tribulation at the last moment. Wang Tianzong took a step forward. There was nothing in front of him. The world was quiet. In reality and illusion, only day and night were alternating. There was no opponent or sword light in his eyes. He stretched out his palm. Ding! In a collision sound that resounded through the sky, Wang Tianzong's body suddenly shook for a moment. Blood flowed from his palm. His face turned slightly pale for a moment, and then returned to normal. The silver sword light, like the vast Yangtze River, completely disappeared. Lin Fengting, with a pale face, appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's 2 fingers clamped the blade of falling stars. Blood dripped from Wang Tianzong's fingers and turned into sword energy all over the sky. Wang Tianzong looked at Lin Fengting. It's really not enough. Wang Tianzong looked at Lin Fengting. You still don't understand. In this realm, sword energy and sword intent are meaningless. His fingers exerted a little force. The incomparably solid blade of falling stars was obviously bent. Wang Tianzong's voice rang in Lin Fengting's ear. In my realm. Bang. The tip of the sword of falling stars was broken by Wang Tianzong's 2 fingers. His voice kept echoing, majestic and unparalleled, like a god. This is heaven and earth. Blood spurted from Lin Fengting's mouth. Countless sword energy between heaven and earth suppressed him. His body was covered with blood, and he fell madly. Li Guangtu, who was no longer in his peak state, and Li Shi, who was a little weaker, rushed up along the trajectory of Lin Fengting's sword light. That silver light had evaporated everything. At this moment, there was no obstacle on their way forward, only their own sword intent. The sword light filled with dark shadows was getting deeper and deeper. It was also the 24 moves of sword. It was also the broken reincarnation. But this sword had a completely different flavor from Lin Fengting's. Li Guangtu's sword light was going up, paranoid and crazy. The infinite blue light had been completely replaced by the bright sword light. Li Shi's mouth was already bleeding. She desperately broke out her own speed, and all the sword energy and sword intent had been completely condensed. She approached Li Guangtu. The shining sword light fused with the deep darkness. It was the same 24 moves of sword. The current sword light, the current sharpness, and the current dazzle all came from the man beside her. Now. Just give it back to him. This was the real sword light of the same origin. The sword energy, sword intent, and sword momentum were even exactly the same. Li Guangtu kept moving forward. Every strand of his hair fluttered, and his eyes were shining. The dual swords combination. In an instant, the two sword energy of the same origin merged into one, and a large piece of sword energy belonging to Wang Tianzong was broken. The starlight in the silent sky dimmed again, and the silver light began to disappear. But the endless thunder filled the sky in an instant. The thunder shook the sky and the sea, illuminating the whole city. Below Li Guangtu, Li Shi opened the 10th unique domain. Li Guangtu's figure appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong was looking at him. His eyes were still calm. In his sight, the strongest man in hundreds of years raised his palm. He clenched his fist. He waved his fist. The thunder disappeared. The extremely violent power that could almost sweep everything spread in an instant. The dual swords combination. The broken reincarnation. All the sword light was completely destroyed in the power of the raging sea. Wang Tianzong's wide sleeves fluttered in the air, and the huge power drowned Li Guangtu, Li Shi, Shadow the Ripper, and Blue Sky Underworld. All the sword light and thunder disappeared completely. Only the blood kept flowing. Wang Tianzong, whose eyes were condensed to the extreme, punched again. The sound of the explosion in the space could be heard clearly. The figures of Li Guangtu and Li Shi suddenly fell. Their bodies hit the ground hard, and the sound of bones breaking was clear and detailed. Li Guangtu's body sank into the ground, and his eyes were a little blurred. Li Shi was also covered in blood, but she still tried to stand up and move closer to Li Guangtu. The sword energy surged between heaven and earth. Wang Tianzong stood in the air. It was heaven and earth. The almost endless white mist in the manor in the distance gathered toward him wildly, extremely excited. His aura was slightly weaker, but the sword energy all over his body was stronger, even more than before. It was irresistible. This was the chosen one in the most perfect state. There was no flaw. Lin Fengting stood up with the broken sword and looked at Wang Tianzong calmly. Li Guangtu's eyes were wild. He roared in a low voice and got up from the ground little by little. Li Shi wanted to help him, but he shook her off directly. Li Shi, who was covered in blood, looked pale, but she still said softly, "I can still fight." Li Guangtu laughed wildly. He raised his hand slightly. The Shadow the Ripper, which fell to the ground, fell into his hand. He looked up at Wang Tianzong in the air, and his eyes were completely blood-red. Kill! His figure rushed to the sky, and the majestic sword intent was gathering. It gathered into the Shadow the Ripper. All the power flowed out of every drop of his blood and gathered into the sword. The Shadow the Ripper came to life. Countless dark rays of light suddenly erupted, accompanied by silver light and dark green light. In an instant, blue sky underworld and falling stars lit up at the same time. The power with obvious destruction was rising. The three murderous weapons in the charging period could not be fired. But it did not mean that they could not self-destruct. Li Guangtu, who had no way to retreat, roared wildly and barely activated the murderous weapons with the strongest sword energy. The world was full of the will of resistance, which was the will of the murderous weapons. But Li Guangtu ignored it. Li Shi ignored it. Lin Fengting also ignored it. The strongest sword light of the three people activated the murderous weapons. All the quiet space above the sky began to turn over completely. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. 3 murderous weapons. The 3 masters rushed over at the same time. This was a full blow from them at the same time. This was also a full blow from the 3 murderous weapons at the same time. An earth-shattering bang suddenly sounded in the turbulent sky. Countless rays of light exploded along with the sword energy. The huge destructive power was destroying everything. All the power swallowed Wang Tianzong's body completely in an instant. The huge and unimaginable power kept surging. There was already chaos in the sky. Lin Fengting fell to the ground and could barely stand. Li Guangtu and Li Shi had fallen. They raised their heads at the same time and looked at the sky. Bang! An incomparably loud heartbeat sounded in the chaotic explosion. Bang, 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 it was a clear, powerful, and steady heartbeat. The explosion, which seemed to be short and long, finally passed. The night sky became calm. Wang Tianzong's figure appeared in front of everyone. The black and gold ancient costume was still fluttering, his hair was not messy, and the long sword was not unsheathed. His eyes calmly and pitifully swept over the 3 people on the ground, and he said faintly, "Is it useful?" At this moment, even Lin Fengting, who had been calm, showed a trace of despair in his eyes. No one had ever seen the Chosen One. So no one knew how powerful the perfect Chosen One was. And no one would know what the so-called absolute dominance and the so-called sweeping across the dark world meant. Until this moment, the truth was completely revealed. It was so cold and cruel. Their strongest blow, the strongest blow of the murderous weapons, and all their means had been exhausted. Wang Tianzong didn't even show any weakness. From beginning to end, he defeated Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, Li Shi, and destroyed 3 murderous weapons. Wang Tianzong didn't even draw his sword. He hadn't drawn his sword yet. The most important thing, and also the most despairing thing, was that this Chosen One came from the Wang family of Beihai. At this moment, the strength of the Wang family of Beihai was secondary. What mattered was that this family had a potion that everyone in the world was eager for. Immortality potion. Wang Tianzong must have immortality potion. And it was immortality potion that could completely recover all injuries and return to the peak state in an instant after activation. And now, Wang Tianzong hadn't been injured yet. He just stood in the air. It was plain, and simple. The surrounding world was full of his sword intent. He was heaven and earth. This world was his sword. It was irresistible. Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on Li Guangtu again. "You won't die so easily," he whispered. "Tonight's battle, so far, is just between you and me, not the conquest of the Wang family of Beihai." But now it seems, he smiled. The thick white mist came from a distance and merged into his body. His aura began to rise little by little and returned to the peak. "You don't have many trump cards." He waved to Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu's body flew up without any struggle. Lin Fengting wanted to stop it. As soon as his body moved, the sword intent pressed over and made his whole body bloody again. Li Shi moved, but she had no strength. Li Guangtu's body was pulled into the sky. Wang Tianzong clutched his neck tightly. Li Guangtu closed his eyes motionlessly. His expression was calm, as if he had already accepted his fate. The light lit up in Wang Tianzong's hand and shone on Li Guangtu. It was extremely bright. "The whole world should see your embarrassment and downfall." Wang Tianzong muttered to himself, and his palm kept exerting force. The whole world was watching Li Guangtu's embarrassment and downfall. Li Tianlan could see it, too. The white mist in the manor had dissipated a lot. In the confinement of the 10th unique domain, Li Tianlan quietly watched the light shining on Li Guangtu. The master of Samsara Palace was also watching. She turned her back to Li Tianlan until a voice sounded behind her. The people of the Li family shouldn't bear these. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Li Tianlan. But you can't change anything now. You still won't let me go? Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace. Does it make sense? The master of Samsara Palace asked. I don't know. Li Tianlan's voice calmed down. I don't know if it makes sense to go there now, and I don't know if it makes sense to come here from Reki City. But no matter whether it makes sense or not, I have to go there, just like I have to come here. You can't stop me, and no one can stop me. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace, and his voice gradually softened. I take back what I said just now. I'm willing to apologize. Mr. Lin is right, and so are you. I'm indeed a jerk, and you're not that. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace and smiled calmly. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly became uneasy. What do you want to do? Thank you for everything you have done for me. I never knew that anyone would be so kind to me except them. Li Tianlan said softly, there was even a moment when I thought you were my mother. Ha, thank you, thank you. Don't be impulsive, Tianlan, listen to me. The master of Samsara Palace sounded a little panicked. I won't. Li Tianlan said softly, I said, no one can stop me, not even you, unless I die. Countless violent sword chi surged out of his body, constantly stirring up the surrounding 10th unique domain. The 10th unique domain felt threatened and suddenly fought back. In an instant, Li Tianlan was already covered in blood. His bones were cracking under the suppression of the domain, and they were about to break. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly screamed and directly withdrew the domain around him. Li Tianlan fell to the ground and laughed, feeling a little sad. He had just given his life to the 10th unique domain. The master of Samsara Palace didn't want him to die, so she could only withdraw the domain. He stood up shakily, walked past the master of Samsara Palace, and whispered, thank you so much. Tianlan. His footsteps were striding away. A pair of extremely soft arms directly hugged his legs. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically, and his body suddenly became extremely stiff. The master of Samsara Palace knelt down. She knelt beside Li Tianlan's legs. This was the master of Samsara Palace. She once overlooked the whole dark world, set off the chaos in Eastern Europe, and planned everything today. She stood at the peak of the invincible realm and the peak of the dark world. At this moment, she knelt at Li Tianlan's feet, holding his thighs tightly with both hands, and her voice was a little chaotic with a slight buzz. She sounded like she was crying. Please, don't go. I can solve all this. I can. Don't go. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled. You can't solve it. Li Tianlan whispered, now Wang Tianzong is completely unsolvable. I don't want to see them die, and I don't want to see you die. Li Tianlan looked at the flash in the distant sky. I don't know what I can do, but if all this is planned by you, and it's all because of me, he said quietly, I'll go over in exchange for him. He thought of what deity had said. The Li family. It was his Li family. So be it. He broke free from the arms of the master of Samsara Palace little by little and whispered, I'm sorry. Thank you. He took a step forward. Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled and gradually became calm. Li Tianlan turned to look at her. You'll die. The master of Samsara Palace whispered, if you go there, you'll definitely die. Li Tianlan didn't say anything. After you die, you'll never see me, Little Bai, or Rushi again. The master of Samsara Palace continued. Dongqing Rushi's confused face changed, and she subconsciously stood in front of Li Tianlan to stop him. Do you really want to go? The master of Samsara Palace asked. Li Tianlan didn't hesitate and nodded. Go. After all, She couldn't stop him. The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were in a trance, as if she thought of the interception many years ago. There were some things, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't stop them. Okay. She said softly, I'll let you go. Before you die. She opened her hands, and her voice trembled and gradually became numb and dead. Hold me. Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment. The master of Samsara Palace opened her hands and waited quietly. Li Tianlan walked over hesitantly and reached out to hold the master of Samsara Palace in his arms. Her figure was very tall. To be exact, she just held him, not in his arms. The master of Samsara Palace held him tightly with both hands and breathed in his scent greedily. Li Tianlan, who had killed all the way, was full of the smell of blood. Amidst the pungent smell, she was like a traveler searching for a drop of water in the desert, desperately searching for that familiar smell. It was a warm and reassuring smell. The master of Samsara Palace closed her eyes. Her expression was extremely calm and stiff. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing down from her eyes. She trembled slightly and kept taking deep breaths. Why do you have to go? She asked softly, and her voice was like a murmur. Li Tianlan's body was a little stiff. There are always some things that have to be done. He paused and laughed at himself. Even if I can't do anything. If I can't do anything, it'll be fine if I don't do it? The master of Samsara Palace murmured, and her tears flowed faster. Li Tianlan was silent and didn't speak. He subconsciously held the master of Samsara Palace tightly. A familiar fragrance that seemed to seep into the soul came over. It was so strong, so natural, so nostalgic. The smell was right in front of him. Right in front of him. Li Tianlan suddenly opened his eyes. Qin Weibai appeared behind him. Li Tianlan's brain was in a mess for a moment. Before he could figure it out, the master of Samsara Palace held him and whispered something. At this moment, Li Tianlan didn't hear clearly what she said. But the unparalleled pain filled his body in an instant, spreading from his chest and making him completely stiff. A knife appeared in the master of Samsara Palace's hand. The sharp blade reflected the cold light. It was extremely sharp and hard, and it pierced through his chest in an instant. It was penetrated from front to back. The sword intent burst out of his body. His body fell to the ground softly. The master of Samsara Palace held the knife and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan looked into her eyes. At this moment, his brain was blank, and the pain was heart-wrenching. He finally heard what the master of Samsara Palace said. 3 simple words. Clear, fleeting, numb, and dead silent. In the sound of blood flowing, the 3 words seemed to float from the sky and fall into the depths of his heart. I'm sorry. Chapter 600. When the storm of sword energy engulfed the whole city of Mormons, Jiang Shangyu's figure appeared in a small town not far from Mormons. The town was small, but its location was very clever. It faced the sea in the north, the mountains in the south, and Mormons in the west. A newly built road ran through the town, and the layout was simple and grand. There was a church on the main road in the middle of the town. Jiang Shangyu, who was drunk all over, still carried the flagon. He walked to the bell tower of the church and sat down. Looking ahead, he thought about the next negotiation and waited quietly. Occasionally, he took a sip of the liquor. He was very restrained when he drank. His initial drunkenness had already been dispelled by the deep cold wind. He looked into the distance of the road with exceptional patience. The army of the snow country had retreated, but not in this direction. In terms of terrain, this was the best way to enter Mormons for all the forces who wanted to enter last. It could even be said to be the only way. After all, even if the Snow Empire retreated, it was still an army of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. The reason why they entered the battlefield last was to preserve their strength. No one was willing to collide with those defeated soldiers. Therefore, Jiang Shanyu firmly believed that he could wait for the person he was waiting for. Lushing Sangxuan had left, and Jiang Shanyu didn't care where he was going. At this point of the final battle, the Sword Sage of East Island had been away for too long, and the elites of Jifeng Sword Training School must have been wiped out. Without worries, Lushing Sangxuan naturally had no reason to fight desperately, but Mormons still had to go. Jiang Shanyu quietly thought about the current situation. This day was the end of this era. It was also the beginning of the decline of the Dark World. In the wilderness, Jiang Shanyu couldn't see the final result. No one could. But presumably, after this day, the experts of the Invincible Realm and even the Thunder-Shocking Realm would become extremely important. Lushing Sangxuan was a good move. Nearly half of the elites of the Jifeng Sword Training School had won Li Kuangtu's trust and made him stay in Mormons with hope. The Jifeng Sword Training School had played its full role, but Lushing Sangxuan still had a task. He still had to return to Mormons. He didn't enter the battlefield to participate in the battle. Instead, he quietly laid in ambush. At the moment when the Sword Sage of East Island would become the end game, there was an absolute variable. The night wind blew past. Jiang Shanyu turned with the wind and looked in the direction of Mormons. It meant that the sword light at the peak of this era was supreme and swept everything. Jiang Shanyu gently smiled and muttered to himself, "Jiang Shanyu, will you die?" His calm eyes gradually became fierce. "How can you live?" He poured the liquor into his mouth and wiped his mouth. "Go to hell, all of you." Shangyu was stunned. In the cold wind, Jiang Shanyu took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. After answering the call, he smiled and said, "Dad." "Jiang Shan," Jiang said. "Jiang Shan's in snow country." Jiang mountain. He country in the inn and mountain in Li. It was not until the next day that Jiang Shan got in touch with his son. These days, he had been paying attention to the situation in snow country all the time. He was one of the youngest Invincible Realm experts in Zhongzhou State, the Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. All of this sounded the same, but under the general trend, the Invincible Realm experts were like nonentities. The chaos in Eastern Europe had spread to this day, and more than half of the experts on the Divine List and the Holy List in the Dark World had died. What could the so-called Invincible Realm experts do if they participated in it? Snow country has retreated. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a while and laughed. Marshal Dongsheng is very powerful. Without snow country, the scale of the war will be reduced, but it will be more tragic. But it has nothing to do with me. His smile was relaxed and soft. "Dad, don't worry. I'm not going to the battlefield. I'm still far away from Mormons. Just watch." He continued to look ahead. A car's headlights appeared in the distance. The car light shone over and kept shining in the darkness. "Dad, I'll be back in the near future." Jiang Shangyu's expression became more and more satisfied. He had waited for the person he wanted. Everything was perfect. "I'm going to meet a very important person now. I'll hang up first." Jiang Shan sighed and hung up the phone. Jiang Shangyu drank the last sip of wine, tightened his clothes, jumped down the bell tower, and walked toward the car lights in front of him. The car lights were getting closer and closer. It was a small convoy, with at most a few hundred people. Dozens of cars seemed to be covered with dust because of the long journey. They drove into the main street of the town and did not slow down at all. They rushed all the way to Mormons at the fastest speed. Whether it was the scale or anything else, it was in line with Jiang Shangyu's expectations. So he was completely relieved. He walked to the middle of the street and stopped in front of the motorcade. The dazzling car lights suddenly shone over. Jiang Shangyu chuckled and bowed slightly to show his respect. The sound of brakes rang out. The off-road vehicle at the front stopped when it was about to hit Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu kept his bowing posture and did not move. The door opened. Heavy footsteps stepped on the ground. An extremely hoarse voice sounded. "Who are you?" Jiang Shangyu raised his head in surprise. In the dazzling light, he could not see who the other party was. He could only feel a general outline. But in his impression and intelligence, there should not be such a person who was qualified to be the first car. Jiang Shangyu? A voice suddenly rang out. It was elegant, feminine, unhurried, and calm. His voice carried a hint of laughter and coldness. How rare. Jiang Shangyu frowned. The headlights in front went out. A tall young man opened the door and got out of the car. He stood in front of Jiang Shangyu. The young man was dressed in a hunting suit and looked handsome. His aura was too feminine, even cold. He was like a poisonous snake lurking in a damp forest. He seemed to know that his temperament was a little inappropriate, so he kept a beard on his upper lip, which made him more or less masculine. He was almost half a head taller than Jiang Shangyu. He walked up to Jiang Shangyu, and his every move was extremely cold and domineering. In the face of the new vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps in Zhongzhou State, who had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, the young man lowered his head slightly. His tone was full of condescending mockery. I didn't expect to see you here. You dare to stop my car. What are you going to do? Jiang Shangyu looked at the young man in front of him and fell silent. He could not say that he was sorry and that he had recognized the wrong person. But he did wait for the wrong person, and he was ridiculously wrong. He knew the young man in front of him. There were not many people in the dark world who did not know him. Before Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai was frozen and Li Tianlan established a new martial arts and became a marshal, the young man in front of him had always been recognized as the #1 expert of the young generation in the dark world. He was the #1 expert of the young generation in the entire dark world. The young patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, with the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, Jiang Guochu. After Jiang Qiansong disappeared and was expelled from the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Guochu had now officially become the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America. It seemed that as early as a few years ago, he had the strength to enter the Invincible Realm at any time. However, in order to achieve higher achievements in the future, he had been suppressing himself and had not broken through. Jiang Shangyu blinked, sighed softly, and said helplessly, "Why are you here?" Jiang Guochu raised his eyebrows. Before he spoke, he suddenly looked up. Jiang Shangyu raised his head almost at the same time as him and looked in the direction of Mormon's. In Yi Futian's sight, the storm of sword intent that stirred up heaven and earth suddenly spread over here. It was the most natural spread. Countless sword intents poured into the plains and into the ocean. The huge sound of tides instantly shook and surged up to the sky. The glaciers were torn apart. In that truly invincible sword chi, the world became extremely gloomy. The bright silver light cut through the sky and moved forward in the matchless sword intent, shattering the sky. The dark light was rising with the thunder. The green light flashed high in the sky. The double sword harmony. Jiang Shangyu's expression became a little stiff, a little stunned, and then became gloomy and cold. The double sword harmony. Li Kuangtu. The shadow was torn. Blue sky underworld. The double sword harmony, the sword light was too familiar to him. He did not expect that the person he was waiting for did not appear. Instead, he arrived at Mormon's first. The person who should not have come appeared in front of him and made trouble for him. What was this? His eyes were fixed on the green light in the distant sky. The green light was rising. Vaguely, he seemed to see the domain of the 10th unique domain. It's really you. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were a little complicated. Why did you make a different choice from that year? He was silent and did not speak for a long time. He came here to wait for Li Shi and the convoy of Kunlun City. In that huge plan, Li Shi was an indispensable and the most critical part. If there was no accident tonight, it would be the first step for him to get in touch with Li Shi, just like how he got in touch with Jifeng Sword Raining School for the first time in East Island more than 3 years ago. But Li Shi did not appear here. Instead, she appeared in Mormon's. He and Li Kuangtu's double sword harmony, this also meant that he put down everything. It didn't matter how the elites of Kunlun City were. What mattered was that if Li Shi traveled alone, this place was naturally no longer a necessary place. He shook his head and sighed softly. Mormons is very lively. Jiang Guochu glanced thoughtfully into the distance. He looked at Jiang Shangyu with a playful expression. Why, do you have anything to say? No. Jiang Shangyu shook his head and turned around. Goodbye. You stopped my convoy and wasted my time. You should pay the price. Jiang Guochu looked at Jiang Shangyu and smiled a little ferociously. One of the future heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State. I really didn't expect that you would take the initiative to come to me. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him and said slowly, I'm in a bad mood now. He turned around little by little. It's really bad. To be exact, it's a little bad. He took a step forward. Do you want to be my punching bag? Jiang Guochu's eyes suddenly froze and he shouted, kill him. Boom. An earth-shattering explosion suddenly broke out in the quiet town. Countless lights flickered wildly in the fire. A series of screams sounded for a moment, and then disappeared in an instant. In the countless fires and explosions, a tall figure turned around and fled without hesitation. One of his hands had completely drooped, and he ran in an extremely embarrassing way. Jiang Shangyu stood where he was and looked at the direction of the other party's escape in the burning fire. He was silent for a long time with no expression on his face. The corpses belonging to the Jiang family of South America on the ground burned for a long time. Jiang Shangyu slowly turned around on the road in the town, looked in the direction of Mormons, and muttered to himself, it's a clear sky, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 601. The white mist surged toward the distance. Indistinctly, chaotic noises penetrated the mist and became clearer and clearer. The blood-stained blade was pulled out of his chest bit by bit. In the heart-wrenching pain, no words could describe Li Tianlan's inner feelings. He fell to the ground, and the blood spread on the ground. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace blankly, and no one knew what he was thinking. This strike was vicious and precise. The blade almost penetrated his heart. The sword energy destroyed the inside of his body. It was not fatal, but it caused Li Tianlan a very serious injury in an instant. Even with the help of the dragon vein, it would take at least half a month to recover from such an injury. It might not be a long time, but it also meant that the next battle had nothing to do with him. He lay quietly on the ground. Blood flowed out of his body, and his body began to become cold. Dongxing Rushi, who was one step faster than Qin Weibai, carefully held him in her arms. She raised her head and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. Her eyes, which used to be clear and blank, suddenly became as sharp as a knife. The ancient famous sword of Jade Pool, Silence, trembled violently on her back. The violent sword energy surged and gathered, and the white mist was vast and mighty. The strong killing intent completely locked on the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace was indifferent. She stood there quietly and looked at Li Tianlan's eyes. There was no emotion in Li Tianlan's eyes. They seemed to be looking at each other, but his pupils had no focus, only blankness. It was the most thorough numbness and silence. The cold wind blew far away with the surging white mist. Unparalleled luck and vitality began to gather toward Wang Tianzong. The eyes of the master of Samsara Palace also became numb and silent. Everything she loved, the whole world, was empty in an instant. It was blank. She didn't know how long she stood there. Her complicated thoughts seemed to stretch time infinitely. Thousands of years, the previous life, the present life, the entanglement of gratitude and hatred, love, hatred, hate, and madness. The boundless white snow and sword light seemed to have drifted over from another world, covering and completely enveloping her. She stood there as if she had lost her soul, leaving only an extremely cold and desperate body. I'm sorry. She finally spoke again. She still had thousands of words and countless secrets that she hadn't shared with him. Sparkling tears fell and froze on the ground. She had so many things to say, but when the words reached her mouth, they became the most ordinary words. Sorry, Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The world in front of him darkened. The darkness gradually surged over. His eyelids became heavier and heavier, but he refused to close them. He only looked at him quietly. There was no hatred, no anger, no confusion. He just watched with a despairing calmness. Why? Dongqing Rushi's voice suddenly sounded. The master of Samsara Palace glanced at her and then at Qin Weibai. There was an unconcealable envy and absent-mindedness in her eyes. She took a step back. After tonight, take him back to Zhongzhou State. She stepped back gently, but her eyes were fixed on Li Tianlan. From now on, take good care of him. Dongqing Rushi's eyes were still sharp. Instinctively, she stood up and reached out to tug at her sleeves. Dongqing Rushi turned her head and glanced at her. Qin Weibai shook her head at her. Her face was pale. Looking at the master of Samsara Palace who was quietly stepping back, her eyes were full of heartache. The master of Samsara Palace, who was dressed in black and looked a little bloated, gradually disappeared in the white mist. His voice sounded in the white mist. Come out. Light footsteps stepped on the soft grass. A middle-aged man with meticulous clothes and appearance walked out of the white mist. A dazzling golden light spread out under his feet. His eyes were blank, but the golden light was extremely bright. The pale golden light seemed to cover the entire sky above the manor, completely enveloping every corner of the manor. Jiang Qiansong. Dongqing Rushi's voice suddenly lowered. The golden light and the man in front of her didn't hide at all. This was the 30-meter mortal world, known as the domain with the strongest defense in the dark world. What appeared in front of her was the former patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, who was wanted by Wulan State after being expelled from the Jiang family of South America and had been missing for a while. Jiang Qiansong looked at Dongqing Rushi indifferently. His domain was still spreading, condensing, and protecting the entire manor. Qin Weibai skillfully applied medicine to Li Tianlan's bleeding. She carefully bandaged the hideous wound and said softly, "He is not an enemy now, and he won't be for the time being." Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Jiang Qiansong in front of her was not only an enemy, but also the most competent bodyguard. He, who was known as the best in the world in defense, was almost the greatest protection of this manor. She suddenly felt a little pain. The subtle pain went deep into her mind little by little. She looked at Jiang Qiansong's eyes full of confusion and murmured to herself, "What's going on?" Li Tianlan looked at the direction in which the master of Samsara Palace left quietly. His will kept struggling. The boundless darkness swallowed him up. He closed his eyes and fell into a coma. Qin Weibai hesitated and whispered, "The palace master suppressed Jiang Qiansong's will and created a new personality in his body." Dongqing Rushi was about to speak when a dazzling light suddenly spread out in the thick white mist. Countless white mist disappeared completely in an instant. The manor, which had been shrouded in white mist in the battle, reappeared in Mormons. The chaotic fighting and noise covered it in an instant. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace had gone far away. The colorful light enveloped her. Her figure began to rise into the air and gradually went up. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world kept shining. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace silently broke through the so-called strongest defense domain in the dark world and disappeared in an instant. Qin Weibai raised her head, and her eyes were sad. From the day the Samsara Palace was established, there were countless plans, countless arrangements, countless sacrifices, countless transactions and compromises. They destroyed the Night Spirit, fought against Zhongzhou State, set off the final battle of Heaven Capital, and entered the chaos of Eastern Europe. The date of death. The trial day. The final day. Everything had an end. The colorful light kept going up and blended into the night sky. Countless karma officially came to an end at this moment. No one could stop anything. The general trend rumbled and rolled forward. Boom! In the earth-shattering explosion, the blood-like scarlet light sounded as soon as the master of Samsara Palace disappeared and the white mist disappeared. The noise of the war came from afar. The manor lost the protection of the white mist and was directly surrounded the moment it reappeared in Mormons. No one could say for sure how long these people had been waiting, and no one knew how they found the location of this manor in the thick white fog. An incomparably ferocious attack came crashing over in an instant. Red light flashed, and someone was charging at the forefront with large strides. 6 people. Surrounding the domain of the 30-meter mortal world, the 6 people in the front rushed over at the fastest speed. Their clothes began to burn while they were running. Their clothes disappeared, and their flesh and blood were scorched in the sudden burning flame. Some reflective luster of metal flowed out. The pupils of the 6 people had completely turned blood red. The mighty energy burst out in an instant, and it was closely connected. It was almost an endless stream of red light. Dongxing Rushi held Li Tianlan gently, and her eyes were blank. Qin Weibai's heart suddenly sank. The clear red light and the mighty energy clearly proved the origin of the other party. The Wang family of Beihai. The Devil Troop. Behind the 6 devils were the most elite forces of the Beihai Corps, hundreds and thousands of them. The elite army kept a subtle distance from the devils and charged at the same time. At this moment, Qin Weibai finally remembered the conversation with the master of Samsara Palace when she was about to enter Mormons. In the countless simulations and deductions of the Samsara Palace, even if everything was perfect, their chips were always a little short. What the Samsara Palace wanted was not victory or defeat. There was no so-called winner in the chaos of Eastern Europe. What the Samsara Palace wanted was a new era in the wilderness, a new era in which Li Tianlan lived. They had blue sky underworld, Shadow Ripper, and falling stars. They had Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, and Jiang Qiansong. There was also a murderous weapon lurking in the city. The Devil Corps, the Xianyuan Sword Troop, the elites of the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan. The 13th floor, the invincible sword, flaming fire, countless bargaining chips were prepared in an unusually ample manner. But it was still not enough. Today's Sword Emperor was truly invincible in the world, and there was only one chance to deal with him. In countless deductions and expectations, the final outcome was always a little short of what the Samsara Palace wanted. It was not much, but it was a crucial point. That was Li Tianlan's life and death. If Li Tianlan really appeared in Mormons, protected by Jiang Qiansong's new personality, the strongest 30-meter mortal world was enough to block most of the dangers. But the Wang family of Beihai had the Devil Troop. Even if the self-explosion of the Devil Troop was not as powerful as the murderous weapon, it was not far behind. The answer given by the master of Samsara Palace was that one group of the Devil Troop sent by the Beihai Corps to Eastern Europe had been destroyed, and the other group had no capital to perish together because of excessive energy consumption. But no one knew how many people there were in the Devil Troop of the Wang family of Beihai. What if Wang Tianzong was crazy enough to throw himself into the 3rd group of the Devil Troop? The master of Samsara Palace said that Jiang Qiansong could stop it. Qin Weibai never doubted it. Even at that time, she never doubted it. Her only doubt was who would stop the subsequent elites of the Wang family of Beihai after Jiang Qiansong stopped the 3rd group of the Devil Troop. At that time, the master of Samsara Palace said that there was still a sword missing. A sword to make up for the difference. Qin Weibai did not know the specific meaning of this sentence at that time, nor did she understand which sword it was. But now, all the expectations had become reality. In front of her was the 3rd group of the Devil Troop. At least 1,000 core elites of the Wang family of Beihai were mighty. Everything was happening. There was really a sword in front of Qin Weibai. The sword trembled violently, and the cracked scabbard was constantly cracking. The famous sword of Jade Pool. Silence. The red light all over the sky spread over. The first demon, who was burning all over, opened his hands. The scarlet light seemed to flow out of every pore of his body. His body leaped into the air, and without any hesitation, he directly hit the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. With the blood mist, his body exploded in an instant, and the violent energy was released to the extreme in an instant. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world began to flash. The second demon rushed into the domain, and a large roar began to sound. Then there was the third person. Jiang Qinsong's body trembled violently. The roaring explosion brought an extremely violent heat wave. A large mouthful of blood spurted from his mouth. He knelt on the ground, still trying to maintain his domain. The fourth person. The fifth person. The sixth person. The red light obliterated everything. The continuous explosions happened in an instant. The extremely solid 30-meter mortal world was completely broken in an instant. The golden light and the red light rushed into the sky at the same time. The devil troop disappeared. A large number of core elites of the Beihai Corps rushed into the manor. It was a vast expanse. Endless chaos broke out in the manor. Flowers and plants were trampled to pieces, and the ground was sinking. The small number of elites of the Samsara and the Qin clan stationed in the manor had almost no room to resist in front of the core power of the Wang family of Beihai. Blood flowed freely. In the continuous roars and screams, the whole world became trance and reality. The silent sword was no longer trembling. Dongqing Rushi held the hilt of the sword. She held Li Tianlan with one hand. Her black hair fell down and fell on his face. Dongqing Rushi stared at Li Tianlan's face and murmured softly, "Tianlan, I love you very much." Countless people surged in, and their murderous intent soared to the sky. They were the strongest elites of the Beihai Corps. They were also abandoned by the Wang family of Beihai. Everything that could prove their identity and position, including the devil troop, had been completely destroyed. At the most suitable time, the Wang family of Beihai was exchanging pawns. They used the devil troop and the core elites of the Beihai Corps to exchange for Li Tianlan. The cracked scabbard of the silent sword broke and fell to the ground little by little. With the sword intent of several invincible realm experts of Jade Pool, the sword shone brightly. Dongqing Rushi held the sword and raised her hand. There was no hesitation, no choice. Her eyes were no longer confused. She was a little reluctant, but she was extremely determined. The sharp sound of a long sword being unsheathed suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. In the next second, the extremely misty and dreamy sword light rose to the sky and tore heaven and earth apart. The sword light enveloped Qin Weibai, Dongqing Rushi, and Li Tianlan. In an instant, it devoured all the elites of the Beihai Corps. In the center of the city, everyone raised their heads and looked in the direction of the manor at the same time. Wang Tianzong took a deep look there and frowned. Li Guangtu, who was held in Wang Tianzong's hand, also felt the sword light and the sword intent. It seemed to be the most gorgeous color in the world, misty and dreamy, holy and ethereal. The unique skill of Jade Pool. The sword of heavenly flying fairy. That was also the sword that Dongqing Rushi once tried to draw the sword in Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, but she was forced back by him. Jade Pool was silent and finally unsheathed in the end of the dark. Of course, he knew whose sword it was. Li Guangtu's eyes turned red in an instant. His eyes were scarlet red, and there was only madness left in them. Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong. His hoarse roar shrouded the whole Mormons in an instant. The killing intent, which had reached the extreme, suddenly burst out along with the reckless sword light. The realm that was only one step away from the chosen one was shattered by him in an instant with great determination. The peak of the invincible realm. The invincible realm was stable. He had just entered the invincible realm. Half-step invincible realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Li Guangtu's realm retreated 1,000 miles, but the unprecedented sword energy covered the sky in an instant and almost tore Wang Tianzong's sword light into pieces. Li Guangtu's scarlet eyes had lost all reason, only madness and ferocity. Wang Tianzong. The misty sword light dimmed and disappeared. In the extremely shrill scream, the 24 moves of sword and the 10th unique domain were completely integrated. There was no sword in Li Shi's hand. But in her hysterical resentment, she became the sharpest sword in the world. There was only sword light between heaven and earth. Li Guangtu was crazy. Li Shi was also crazy. When all the chips were thrown out, the two of them rushed to Wang Tianzong at the same time with their own lives as chips. Regardless of everything. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 602. The change was completely unexpected. The dreamy sword light in the distance rose and disappeared. When people were still guessing which invincible realm expert it was, Li Guangtu's furious and crazy roar had resounded over the whole Mormons. The indescribable rage swallowed all reason in an instant. Li Guangtu broke down. All the paranoia, pride, ambition, and obsession turned into wildfire in an instant. He let go of everything and no longer thought about the future or the outcome. Wang Tianzong in front of him was so clear. Every thought in his brain, every drop of blood, and even every cell was roaring in a complicated manner. Kill him. Kill him. The sword light shone in the furious roar. In an instant, Li Guangtu tried his best to break free from Wang Tianzong's restraint. Mormons, which was almost in ruins, was full of flashing sword light. The sword light filled the sky and the earth. In an instant, the whole Mormons almost became a forest full of sword energy. Flames appeared in every corner, burning the heaven and the earth. This sword carried all the martial arts of deity, moving forward with indomitable will. Wang Tianzong's figure began to retreat for the first time, and he was 1,000 meters away in an instant. Li Shi's sword light rushed over from behind him. At this moment, what Wang Tianzong felt was completely different but extremely similar madness. Li Guangtu's sword intent burned between heaven and earth. The fire spread on the ground, and the sky was dyed orange. This was his most thorough outbreak. For the first time in his life, the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation sword appeared on him at the same time. The 2 unique skills of Sword Tao, which were known as the strongest in the dark world, had 2 completely different ways of exerting force. The sword light continued to spread and went straight forward. The extremely condensed domain behind him began to expand in the sword intent. That was the extreme expansion of the 10th unique domain. The 10th unique domain, which was known as the strongest domain in the dark world, spread over under the pressure of the 24 moves of sword. Li Guangtu. Li Shi. They were both 2 different unique skills. The completely different powers were tearing their bodies every minute and second. Their injuries were getting worse and worse, and their vitality was flowing away crazily. A pincer attack. Wang Tianzong had no way to retreat. His body instantly went up. In the calm silence, his eyes were full of gloom. The countless probing and guesses he had made in the past found the answer that could not be more obvious from this sword. Wang Tianzong smiled. Is your heart aching? His voice converged into a line and directly passed into Li Guangtu's ears. It was incomparably cold. When she came back from the border, my heartache was 10 times more intense than yours. Huawu is dead, and your last hope is gone. Are you in despair? You should understand how I felt back then. I should let you experience it slowly. His body was still moving upward. Li Shi and Li Guangtu were also going up. The 2 figures were getting closer and closer. Wang Tianzong was calm. This sword was very strong, really very strong. Li Guangtu's determination to die, the combination of the 6 paths of reincarnation and the 24 moves of sword was even slightly stronger than Li Guangtu's tribulation when he was desperate. This state was very close to Wang Tianzong's state before the tribulation. Plus Li Shi. If the 2 of them combined their swords, perhaps there would really be a sword that could reach the state of the chosen one. However, how could an imperfect prodigy be considered supreme? Wang Tianzong was not afraid of this sword, but when he saw the 2 people below fighting desperately, and the different forces tearing their flesh and blood with great pain every minute and second, Wang Tianzong suddenly felt extremely happy. He thought of the summer solstice. All the worries and fears of so many years seemed to have found a vent at this moment. Wang Tianzong's eyes became a little crazy. The two sword lights at the bottom, which were angry from different directions, finally gathered together. In an instant, the 6 paths of reincarnation and the 10th unique domain began to crazily squeeze each other. They repelled each other. Li Guangtu's face was covered with wrinkles in an instant. The white dress fluttered in the air. Li Shi's black hair was turning snow-white at a speed visible to the naked eye, becoming pale, and eventually losing its luster. But the 224 moves of sword that were determined to die merged perfectly in the mutual repulsion of the 6 paths of reincarnation and the 10th unique domain. Boom! There was a sudden violent sound between heaven and earth. The loud sound swept through the whole city. In everyone's sight, the 2 sword lights burning the sky were completely integrated, and the infinite sword energy turned into a ray of light shooting straight into the sky. Crack! Wang Tianzong's palm moved. A crisp sound swept through the sky. It seemed like a long sword was unsheathed, and also like a bone vibration. The sword light that was condensed to the extreme illuminated the night sky very clearly. In the absolutely pure light, everyone saw a touch of black. That touch of black expanded in the blink of an eye and squeezed into the pure light with incomparable strength. Everyone in the city saw this scene. It was a black sword. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas were carved on both sides of the sword edge, with unparalleled majesty. The 100-meter-long giant sword seemed to be a black phantom. The incomparably heavy blade vibrated in the light. The sun, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas on both sides of the sword edge seemed to move at the same time. The 100-meter-long giant sword phantom directly tore the incomparably pure sword light and pressed down with supreme majesty. The empty space suddenly seemed to be real like water ripples. The ripples continued to spread under the suppression of the black sword and filled the sky. With blood all over their bodies, the figures of Li Shi and Li Guangtu fell softly. Some elites of the Samsara Palace rushed over to catch their bodies and quickly retreated. But as soon as they moved, the invisible sword intent had completely torn their bodies, and blood burst out. Wang Tianzong's figure seemed to come to the ground from the sky with one step. His breath was steady and still at the peak, and even his clothes were still clean and tidy. The black giant sword was carried behind him, as if it had never moved. Li Shi and Li Guangtu fell to the ground, completely unconscious. Wang Tianzong glanced at them and said faintly, "Their lives are mine. Who wants to take them away?" The scene became completely silent. Wang Tianzong glanced around. Within sight, people had knelt down constantly. The first was the Beihai Corps. Then a few surviving small forces in the dark world knelt on the ground. Then, a small number of elites of the Samsara Palace also knelt on the ground. The Lin clan. The Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Polar Ground Alliance. More and more people knelt down. His Majesty's invincible voice turned into a sound wave and continued to spread at the end of this era. No one had a fluke anymore. No one could stop Wang Tianzong anymore. Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, Li Shi, 3 murderous weapons. They used all means to break out. They didn't even cause any injury to Wang Tianzong. Supreme and supreme. In the countless voices of submission, Wang Tianzong's eyes kept turning. There were still people who didn't kneel. The old people who belonged to the Li family in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The real elites of the Lin clan. The real henchmen of the Samsara Palace. Everyone was glaring at him. He looked at Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who was covered in blood, stood up shakily. Wang Tianzong looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. "Come back to Beihai with me," he suddenly said, "just like when we were young, stay in Beihai with peace of mind. We are still brothers." "Brothers?" Lin Fengting laughed. "Do you want me to give up martial arts?" "Yes." Wang Tianzong's voice was calm. "You have martial arts. I will be uneasy if you live in Beihai. I have no brothers." Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong and whispered, "From the moment you came to Mormons, I had no brothers. Yusheng was imprisoned in Beihai and watched Beihai swallow up the Lin clan. This was definitely not the result that Lin Fengting wanted to see. You're still not reconciled, Wang Tianzong said quietly. Of course I'm not reconciled. Lin Fengting was still smiling. He was covered in blood, but his smile was extremely free and easy. This is the price that the loser should bear. In fact, you thought too much from the beginning. Even if I broke through, I might not go to the Lin clan. Tianzong, do you believe what you said? Lin Fengting countered with a question. Is there really absolute freedom in the supreme rule? The freedom that belongs to the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong looked at him and was silent for a long time. The loser should pay the price. Lin Fengting took a step back. But I haven't lost yet. He pulled out a soft sword from his waist. The soft sword edge was instantly straightened. Lin Fengting's voice continued to ring. Before you came, I talked about you with the master of Samsara Palace. She said that there are only 3 men she likes in this life, and you are one of them. So you deserve her last resort. Lin Fengting's body began to glow. An extremely bright and dazzling light condensed on Lin Fengting's sword edge and went straight into the sky in an instant. The whole city began to shake without warning. Wang Tianzong suddenly raised his head. One after another, sword light rose in all corners of the city. In all directions. Plus Lin Fengting. 13 sword lights. They were extremely dazzling and weak. The sword energy, which was almost of the same origin, quickly entwined and rushed to the highest point of the night. Mormons shook more and more violently. Sword formation of the 13-story buildings. Lin Fengting's voice floated. If you die today, I swear by the ancestors of the Lin clan that the Lin clan will do its best to protect the Wang family of Beihai in the future. Wang Tianzong looked calm and did not speak. His sight went into the night sky. In the extremely quiet world, an unprecedented aura was turbulent in the highest point. Someone seemed to be rising. He was about to fall. Rising. Everything under her feet began to shrink gradually. In the thin air, her thoughts became absent-minded. She had forgotten who she was. The close-fitting armor that made her body look extremely bloated made a cracking sound under the tremendous pressure. Countless sword intents were constantly brewing in the sky. Chaotic memories flooded his mind like a tidal wave. I'm Li Tianlan. They all deserve to die. From today on, I allow you to call me Empress. The Pope agreed. I want flowers to be spread all the way from the Holy Land to Zhongzhou State. Whatever my sword wants, I'll have it. Where's my Empress? Why, I'm sorry. You'll die, and so will he. I really want. Her mind fell from the highest point into the abyss, falling all the way without an end. Her tears had already dried up. Endless numbness and silence occupied all her consciousness. Do you think I'm a bird? I have wings. My parents are dead. It's all your fault. I want to fly down and show you. The chaotic and absent-minded will begin to concentrate unprecedentedly, climbing toward a vague boundary. Please, sir. From today on, he is the holy disciple of the Lin clan. Child, welcome home. The Wang family of Beihai will fall. This era will be buried with it. She reached out and touched the hilt of the sword in the nothingness behind her. I really want to take another look at him. In the supreme void, her rising figure finally stopped. The colorful light lit up. An incomparably perfect sword intent reflected the starlight and condensed in her hand. I really want to take another look at him. Clang. The sound of the long sword being unsheathed suddenly resounded through the sky and the earth. The wind was rising and the clouds were surging. The extremely clear sound, like thunder, continued to spread from the sky. The colorful light bloomed in her hand. I really want to take another look at him. The long sword that had been sealed for more than 20 years was pulled out from her back little by little. It was pulled out from the nothingness. Take another look at him. I'm sorry, the rainbow-colored light dimmed from its incomparably dazzling brilliance and became silent. The giant sword was held in the hand of the master of Samsara Palace from the nothingness. The sword intent in the sky was rioting. This famous sword that had been sealed for countless years showed its power for the first time in a long time. The blade was spinning in her hand. The black giant sword. It was broad, heavy, and majestic. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas were carved on both sides of the blade. The sword intent was hazy. It was so perfect, so proud, so noble. The sun, moon, and stars were shining on the blade. The mountains, lakes, and seas were flowing on the blade. This sword was the world. In the sky, the master of Samsara Palace lowered her head and looked at the sword. On the ground, the body of the coldness of 9 states began to shake inexplicably. The master of Samsara Palace held the giant sword and aimed it at the sword emperor on the ground. Her voice echoed from a high place, clear and pleasant, like thunder. This sword is called Xianyuan Blade. This chapter is about the title. In fact, this volume is about this sword, this sword. I said before that this volume would have the strongest sword in the book. I think I said it last year. Chapter 603. Only by looking at the world from a high vantage point would the world reveal its true nature. The mountains were shrinking, the rivers were shrinking, and the mountains, the rivers, the sun, the moon, and the stars were all silent. The world was silent. There was no clamor, no thunder, not even a thought. The heavens and the earth encompassed the entire world. Everywhere the eye could see was frozen, and it was like a painting silently waiting for someone to shatter it. Therefore, the world was extremely fragile. She stood in the air, looking at the Xianyuan blade in her hand. The pitch-black body of the sword became dark and shiny, and the sun, moon, and stars engraved on the blade seemed to have completely flown out. The almost solidified sword intent continued to grow. The 7-colored light flickered faintly. The pitch-black blade trembled slightly. A truly invincible momentum fell directly into Mormons from afar, mighty and mighty. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded from below, cold, indifferent, and fearless. They are all external objects. Then the master of Samsara Palace remembered that Wang Tianzong had seen this sword before. At the funeral held by Zhongzhou State for the victims of the Snowdance Corps in Reki City, the appearance of this sword was equivalent to telling Wang Tianzong that she had not died. Therefore, Wang Tianzong should have been prepared for this sword. Countless scenes kept echoing in his mind. Since I entered the invincible realm, I haven't used any so-called conspiracy. I've been sneaky and secretive. I look mysterious and unfathomable. Is it useful? My sword is enough to fight against the entire world. No one can fight against the entire world. That's because you aren't strong enough. Fake death? Such good acting skills. The master of Samsara Palace laughed. Under the mask, her eyes were completely silent, and even her smile was gloomy. Yes, Wang Tianzong was prepared. But the master of Samsara Palace didn't care at all. She pushed for the decisive battle of Heaven Capital, the 3-year fighting in the Dark World, the chaos in Eastern Europe, and the entire Dark World to the abyss. She didn't care about anything. Truly powerful people didn't need to care about such things. She might not be strong enough. But this sword was strong enough. Under the strongest sword light, any kind of defense would be meaningless. She looked up at the sky. The clouds floating in the sky were almost within reach. Starlight sprinkled down, reflecting the misty light. It was so clear, but the lights below seemed far away, hazy and almost illusory. The world was turning upside down. Day and night alternated. The finish line was right in front of him. She did not respond to Wang Tianzong's words, and she did not need to. As Xianyuan Feng shook violently, she lifted her foot and took a step forward. The instant his foot landed on the ground was extremely short, yet infinitely long. One sword intent after another flew into the sky. The sword intent was fixed in all directions, blocking the entire Mormons. The master of Samsara Palace's body tightened. Boundless power and sword chi burst out from her body in an instant, like the roar of a mountain or a tsunami. Countless images flashed through her mind. The sword intent continued to rise, surpassing one peak after another. The will that was condensed to the extreme broke through the incomparably firm boundary and entered a new world. The flying snow in the depths of his heart rolled up, and along with the strong wind, the surrounding mountains began to crumble. The Yangtze River, the Yellow River, the vast ocean, the whole world was in turmoil. The 15th blade. Samsara. She lifted her head and finally saw him again. Heavy rain and strong winds. Amidst the endless storm, he stood in front of her with a smile. Look at me, I will sweep this world clean for you. Intense pain spread throughout his body. The sword chi was surging, shattering the void, and the wind and clouds were turbulent. His bones began to shatter. His feet. His legs. His abdomen. His ribs. His cervical spine. Every piece of bone, every piece of muscle completely collapsed in the condensation of the sword intent. The blood flowed through his body without any hindrance. It was warm and comfortable. The wind surged over. With a clear cracking sound, the silver mask began to shatter. Cracks gradually appeared on her lifelike face. Half of the mask covering her true face shattered in the air, revealing half of her delicate and sharp face. Her body was constantly shaking. Her bones and muscles collapsed completely. The sword intent surged over and surrounded her. That bloated body was deformed in the air. Bang! With the sound of metal shattering, countless pieces of heavy armor fell apart. Her figure became extremely slender and enchanting, but she had no weight. Only that hand was still holding the Shenyuan blade tightly. The sword energy continued to rise, shattering the world and filling everything. Blood gushed out of her body. The world was like the autumn wind. Life was like falling leaves. If I let go, the bones of her fingers began to shatter. Blood flowed down from every part of her body. Everything was fine. The master of Samsara Palace opened her eyes. In the boundless void, a butterfly appeared in her line of sight, dancing gracefully. She laughed softly. The subtle sound of flapping wings rang in everyone's ears. The sound of flying was everywhere in the sky and on the ground. It was subtle and clear. Wang Tianzong looked around the whole city. In an instant, Lin Fengting, who had almost lost all his sword energy, fell to the ground. The dazzling sword light guided all the sword energy around him. Flaming fire danced at the end of the city. The sharp sword energy kept flying. The sword, which gathered all her martial arts cultivation, rushed up layer by layer. One after another, the half-step invincible realm experts began to burn themselves. Countless sword energy rushed into the sky and were closely connected, blocking the whole city and guiding the direction of the supreme sword. Butterflies appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Butterflies appeared in front of everyone. The butterflies all over the city were flying in every corner of the city. They were free, happy, and melancholy, as if there were all kinds of states in the world. Everyone seemed to be lost in these butterflies, lost in thought. Wang Tianzong was still calm. The sword in the air was getting clearer and clearer. The absolute sword intent drove the absolute will. At this moment, after the Pope and Angel, the dark world finally had a third transcendent realm expert in the spiritual field. The butterflies fluttered their wings and flew high. In an instant, Wang Tianzong suddenly came to his senses. The butterflies all over the city suddenly disappeared. In the Beihai Core, a large number of elites subconsciously stretched out their hands as if they wanted to catch something. Their eyes suddenly moved, and blood instantly spurted out of their mouths. Countless people fell down with the disappearance of the butterflies. Death was spreading wildly. The crazy and hoarse roar, like that of a wild beast, rang out. More than a dozen figures with their bodies burning with flames rushed toward Wang Tianzong desperately. The elites of Samsara Palace began to drag Lin Fengting away. Li Guangtu and Li Shi were also dragged away by the elites of Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows for a moment. When he was about to make a move, an extremely violent voice suddenly rang out. Go to hell. On the tall building in the distance, a burly figure like a giant raised the muzzle. The leader of the Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. Tyrant recovered his strength with the drugs of the Wang family of Beihai. Tyrant held the murderous weapon lent to him by the Wang family of Beihai. The elegant and soothing indefinite grace suddenly glowed. In the brilliant light, a ray of light that shone more than half of the city appeared in front of Wang Tianzong in an instant. It arrived in an instant. This blow had almost no process of flight, and the huge destructive power had directly covered Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong opened his hands, and the violent sword intent surged in an instant. The light of indefinite grace was forcibly imprisoned in the violent sword intent. The killing intent flashed in Wang Tianzong's eyes. He suddenly waved his hand, gathering the destructive power of indefinite grace in an instant, and rushed straight to Tyrant. In the roar of destruction, he still wanted to chase, but more than a dozen figures burning with flames had rushed over. The earth-shattering explosion swept across, and smoke was rising. No one knew their names. From the beginning of their appearance, they were destined to be consumables that would disappear with the Samsara Palace. Their transformation technology was far worse than that of the Devil Troop. But if they didn't consider the endurance and only pursued the destructive power, their power was no worse than anyone. This was the Devil Troop. The Devil Troop of the Samsara Palace. All the devils began to gather and then exploded at the same time. The two extreme poisons merged together and turned into turbulent smoke. The perfect combination of coldness and heat. The coldest poison. The hottest poison. Even if Wang Tianzong was fearless, he didn't want to face these at this time. He frowned and took a step back subconsciously. All the patience in his eyes disappeared completely. The killing intent filled his eyes. His figure went higher and higher into the sky. Looking at Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu who were getting farther and farther away, his fingers moved slightly. The world suddenly quieted down. In an instant, Wang Tianzong suddenly raised his head. His face became unprecedentedly serious. Above the sky, countless wind and thunder broke out, and blood was flying. The master of Samsara Palace, whose body had completely collapsed, managed to open her eyes. There was no starlight in front of her. Her consciousness began to be swallowed by the darkness. In the boundless darkness, she thought of what he had said in the snow-filled sky. It was the sentence she remembered the most clearly. She closed her eyes and said softly. The world was like the autumn wind. Life was like falling leaves. This was the last voice that the master of Samsara Palace left to the world. It was clear, stable, majestic, and proud. You, non-entities. High in the sky, she let go of her hand. Buzz. In the buzzing sound that filled everything, Xianyuan Feng flew out. In an instant, the whole sky of Mormons was surging. The sword light that filled the world was burning under the night sky, like thousands of stars burning and falling. Meteors appeared under the night sky. Thousands of meteors. Thousands of swords. In Wang Tianzong's sight, the whole world was completely compressed into a sword light in an instant. All the meteors were residual shadows. There was only one sword between heaven and earth. All in one sword. The sword light that flew over from the sky tore the sky for tens of thousands of meters and the whole city. With indescribable sharpness, it almost reached Wang Tianzong's time limit in the blink of an eye. This was the real end of Kendo. Perfect, flawless, and extremely brilliant. In the peak of glory, no one saw someone falling from the sky, and no one would care. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. He saw the true face of Xianyuan Feng. Xianyuan Feng's appearance, momentum, size, and even sword intent were exactly the same as the coldness of 9 states. The meteors cut through the sky. The sky fell and the earth cracked. The ancient costume on Wang Tianzong's body fluttered coldly. In the clear and crisp sound, in everyone's sight, the coldness of 9 states was unsheathed in an instant. Xianyuan Feng shone. It was colorful. There was colorful light everywhere between heaven and earth. There was only black and white on the coldness of 9 states. Between the day and night, the sharp edge was thrown out. The whole city began to shake crazily. The supreme sword intent swept across the whole wilderness in an instant. Collapsed skyscrapers, messy ground, flying dust, solidified blood, and verdant grass. Huge waves in the sea. Everything in the world rose up at the same time as Wang Tianzong's sword was unsheathed. The black and white light spread out and covered the colorful sword light outside the sky. Countless ruins combined into a mad dragon and went straight to the sky 10,000 meters high in the blink of an eye. Xianyuan Feng fell straight down. Amidst the loud explosions, dazzling rays of light shot everywhere. Without any pause, Xianyuan Feng, burning with colorful light, fell straight down, penetrated countless rising boulders, smashed a large number of ice flowers, and broke the waves. The world was extremely fragile. All matter was shattered by this sword strike. You were all nonentities. There seemed to be endless black and white light flowing around Wang Tianzong. The colorful light shone down. Everything was real, and everything was illusory. The rapidly flowing black and white sword energy flew away. Day and night alternated. Wang Tianzong stood in the sky, and the light in an instant was like the sun. The black and white sword light smashed the colorful sword light in an instant. Xianyuan Feng smashed the night and the strong light, still moving forward. All in one sword. Sword energy, sword light, sword intent. They were all illusory. A sword was a sword. The heavy sword light smashed the black and white sword intent. The whole city continued to collapse under the suppression of the 2 kinds of sword energy. Countless tall buildings were completely razed to the ground. The sword light, which had no way to retreat, rushed over directly, condensed the epitome of an era, and kept moving forward. Time seemed to freeze completely. Forever and ever. Wang Tianzong stood in the sky and was still shining. In the clear light and shadow, Xianyuan Feng, who seemed to tear the sky from the 9th heaven, moved forward all the way, smashing the black and white sword intent and the endless light. There was no hesitation or confrontation. From beginning to end, there was only forward. It was invincible and nothing could not be broken. Bang! In the clear cracking sound, half of the sword edge of coldness of 9 states was smashed and shot out. Xianyuan Feng's sword edge cut off the coldness of 9 states without any hesitation and directly penetrated Wang Tianzong's chest. Blood spilled. It was like a dream. Samsara in a moment. The shooting star disappeared. The scorching sun in the sky dimmed completely. There was silence between heaven and earth. Everything ended abruptly after an instant of extreme brilliance. That truly perfect and invincible sword strike was simply too fast. It was so fast that no one could react in time. No one even knew what had happened in that instant. The shooting star cut through the sky and disappeared in a flash. The few survivors raised their heads and looked at the sky. The scorching sun in the sky dimmed and gradually disappeared. Wang Tianzong, dressed in an ancient costume, fell from the sky. A large amount of blood stained the lapel on his chest, and the gold rims on his clothes were stained with blood. His body landed steadily on the ground. Countless white mists still flew over from afar and merged into his body. His face was slightly pale, but he was still calm and indifferent. His aura seemed to have returned to the peak again. In the silence, he held the broken half of coldness of 9 states, raised his head, and looked in the direction where Xianyuan Feng flew over. That place had already turned into nothingness. Under the clouds, there was only a hazy starlight. Wang Tianzong looked at it quietly and was silent for a long time. Chapter 604. The smoke and dust over the city slowly dissipated. The cold starlight shone on the city that was already in ruins. The corpses were cold, and the blood had completely solidified. In the formless and stiff scene, all the sword light and killing intent were dimming. In countless corners, all the survivors were silent and even a little dull. The black and white and the meteor-like colorful sword light had completely disappeared. But the supreme sword intent seemed to be imprinted between heaven and earth and in the depths of everyone's heart. No words could describe that sword strike. The sword light lit up in the sky tens of thousands of meters away, with thousands of residual shadows. It burned the night sky, tore heaven and earth, stirred up a raging tide, and penetrated the city. That sword strike was gorgeous, sharp, crazy, and determined. The real power was indescribable. When the sword light shattered all the obstacles, cut through the black and white, cut off the coldness of 9 states, and even penetrated Wang Tianzong without any hindrance, there were only the most ordinary words left in everyone's heart. It was thrilling. That was the most thrilling sword strike in the dark world for hundreds of years. The starry sky and the scorching sun, reality and illusion alternated. An eternal sword strike. It was like the declaration in the air at the moment when the long sword lit up. You are all nonentities. A major general of the Beihai Corps stared at the sky in a daze. The black and white and colorful sword light had long disappeared. But countless lights and shadows were still flashing in his pupils. He muttered to himself, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell straight to the ground. In the purgatory of Heaven Capital, a veteran of the Li family shook his head desperately. In severe pain, he seemed to want to reach out and cover his head. But as soon as he stretched out his hand, his whole body had become completely stiff. In the Samsara Palace, a core expert whose status was not inferior to that of a super master fell to the ground. Blood flowed from his mouth. He tried to open his mouth and reached out to grab something. Tens of thousands of meters away. The Sword Emperor and the Master of Samsara Palace exchanged a sword strike. The nearly eternal sword light was still flashing and replaying. No one knew whether it was a long time or a short time. Countless survivors' wills were completely shattered by that sword light. Some people's foundation was completely destroyed, and some people lost their vitality. That was supposed to be a supreme power, but on this night, there was a confrontation between the two. The two sword lights, one above and one below, almost destroyed the will of all the experts. When the sword lights fell, it was unknown how many experts' foundations were severely damaged. Wang Tianzong stood where he was. He rose up in a straight line and fell down in a straight line. That soul-stirring sword seemed to have left no trace on him other than some blood. He looked in the direction of the sword light for an unknown amount of time before he slowly withdrew his gaze. Powerful life force gathered in his body, and the huge life force combined with the last white mist in the air, continuously repairing his body. His aura was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, and in the blink of an eye, he seemed to have returned to his peak. It was not until this moment that the crowd in a trance was sure that when the sword light rushed over and penetrated Wang Tianzong's chest at the last moment, it was not an illusion. Wang Tianzong did not block the sword. In the end, he still used the immortality potion. That meant Wang Tianzong's life. This might be exciting news. But now the sword light had completely disappeared, and Wang Tianzong was still standing there. All the excitement instantly turned into despair. Wang Tianzong sighed softly. His slight voice seemed to spread throughout the city and fell in everyone's ears. The people who were still in a trance suddenly woke up. The sword light disappeared completely. The world was silent. Wang Tianzong stood there with a strong aura, invincible in the world. The body of the coldness of 9 states had been smashed, but the last picture was still the picture of Wang Tianzong looking down at Mormons. The general trend surged over Mormons and began to dissipate. In the desolation and confusion, the chaos in Eastern Europe came to an end. Everything came to an end at the moment when the two sword lights met. Whether they liked it or not, the end was like this. So more and more people struggled to stand up. They knelt down in the direction of Wang Tianzong, prostrating themselves to show their submission. The loser should pay the price of dignity and more. Wang Tianzong did not speak. He looked into the distance, through the chaotic crowd and ruins. In silence, the elites of Samsara Palace had dragged the most important figures away from the battlefield. Lin Fengting, who was in a coma. Li Guangtu, who was seriously injured and dying. Li Shi, they had gradually gone far away, but this distance was not far for Wang Tianzong. 1 step, or 2 steps, but Wang Tianzong did not move. He quietly watched them get farther and farther away. From beginning to end, he did not move. In the countless voices of submission and worship, he trampled all of Eastern Europe and even the entire dark world under his feet. He thought of the sword light that had disappeared but seemed to exist eternally. He had never thought of that kind of kendo, nor did he expect that Samsara Palace would have such a sword. The 13-story building, which used the whole city as a sword formation, completely broke out the moment Xianyuan Feng entered the sky above the city. The sword formation was ignited in an instant. Until that moment, the power of that sword was really at its peak. That sword contained everything of the master of Samsara Palace. It was the sword intent that Xianyuan Feng had accumulated for many years. It was the complete cooperation of the 13-story building under the guidance of flaming fire. It was also Lin Fengting's peak all-out attack. This was the trump card of Samsara Palace, which was unprecedentedly powerful. The voice of worship and submission was like a tsunami. Wang Tianzong was a little melancholic. August 24th was about to pass. Samsara Palace was completely destroyed on this day. The master of Samsara Palace lost the last group of elites on the battlefield, but she also got the result she wanted. Wang Tianzong knew that he could not stop all this after all. He defeated the master of Samsara Palace. But he did not defeat that sword light. No victory, no defeat. Perhaps from the very beginning, this chaos was destined to have no victor. Wang Tianzong raised his head and looked in another direction. Among the countless prostrating figures, an extremely tall figure stood there. Wang Tianzong looked at him. The other party was also looking at him. That was Tyrant. Tyrant with indefinite grace in his hand. The other party stood there quietly, looking at Sword Emperor who suppressed the entire dark world. His eyes were a little playful, a little indifferent, and a little cruel. The fact is obvious. Wang Tianzong said slowly, "You are on the wrong team. Hypnosis is not that magical." Tyrant said indifferently, "Especially when you are not in the transcendent realm. It is even more difficult to hypnotize an expert who is close to the peak of the invincible realm, and it is even more impossible to turn an invincible realm expert into a puppet. Samsara Palace hypnotized me, but at the critical moment, it could only influence my decision to a certain extent. In other words, their hypnosis could make me make the most correct choice at a more rational time." Wang Tianzong said yes. His eyes were unfathomable. Is this the right choice? Of course. Tyrant smiled and strode over. For now, it seems that this result is not bad. Ha, Wang Tianzong also laughed. Don't look at me like that. Tyrant's eyes were a little crazy. You can't threaten me. I was tempted to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai, but when you are strong enough to sweep the dark world, there is no place for the Polar Ground Alliance. If I don't do anything tonight, I will definitely be a dog at the feet of the Wang family of Beihai in the future. I have enough of such a life. I can shoot you now. I've ruined your plan. I have to say that this murderous weapon is very useful. So it's mine. After tonight, Snow Country is also mine. Maybe the Wang family of Beihai will also be mine." Wang Tianzong didn't move. He just looked at Tyrant with some pity in his eyes. Why? Because I still have the power to fight. Tyrant laughed wildly. What about you? You look strong and at the peak, but in fact, you are just bluffing. So what if you are the heavenly sun? In the face of that sword, I don't believe that you still have the ability to kill me. If you really have this ability, over there. He pointed to the direction of Li Guangtu's retreat and the manor in that direction. Li Tianlan was in the manor. They are all there. If you still have the power to fight, why don't you go and kill them? You may want to, but you can't. He was getting closer and closer to Wang Tianzong. The remaining army of the Wang family of Beihai gathered and rushed over. Tyrant sneered. Sword Emperor? Go to hell. He raised his hand and slapped Wang Tianzong's face hard. He liked this action and the feeling of smashing the famous sword light with one slap. The condensed domain was released in his hand. Tyrant laughed and waved his arm hard. There was no crisp sound. Patter, something seemed to fall to the ground. The sharp pain came to the brain after a short stagnation. Blood spurted out. Tyrant opened his eyes wide. His eyes were bloodshot and extremely ferocious. The moment his arm was about to touch Wang Tianzong, he seemed to enter another world. That world was vast and deep, and the sword light was surging. He had no room to struggle at all. The sword light swept over and directly cut his arm. How is it possible? Tyrant's ferocious roar sounded. I told you. Wang Tianzong took a step forward. You are on the wrong team. The sword energy did not light up, but there was a slight friction sound in the air. Wang Tianzong walked past Tyrant and reached out to take the indefinite grace in his hand. The broken coldness of 9 states and the indefinite grace shrank in his hand at the same time. He stepped forward. Tyrant behind him had completely stiffened. An icy wind blew over the silent city. The icy wind swept over. Tyrant's body shattered in an instant and turned into ashes, swirling in the air. The chaos in Eastern Europe began with the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. It also ended with the complete destruction of the Polar Ground Alliance. Countless masters knelt on the ground, shivering, and no longer dared to resist. Wang Tianzong did not look at them. He walked slowly in the city, but he crossed a distance of hundreds of meters with one step. His figure was getting farther and farther away and disappeared in an instant. The white mist in the manor completely dissipated. A large number of corpses almost covered the manor. After treating the wounds of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi, a small number of elites of Samsara Palace carried their bodies into the villa of the manor. Li Guangtu, Lin Fengting, and Li Shi were still being carried to the manor. Qin Weibai sat on the grass, looked up at the starry sky, and was lost in thought. In the light footsteps, Wang Tianzong's figure walked directly into the manor. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 605. Under the night sky, the manor was completely clear. Without the dense fog, the hazy starlight sprinkled down, and the inside and outside of the manor seemed extremely clear. When Wang Tianzong walked into the manor, the last wisp of white fog in the corner had turned into a silk thread, slowly swimming in the direction of Li Tianlan. As he approached, the white thread obviously paused, and then continued to float toward Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong's pupils contracted slightly for a moment, but he did nothing. Qin Weibai had already stood up. She calmly looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes, and her eyebrows were full of coldness. The Samsara Palace was destroyed. But the goddess was still the goddess. She stood there, and there was still a kind of coldness and arrogance that no one dared to blaspheme. But Wang Tianzong clearly saw a touch of blankness deep in Qin Weibai's eyes. There was only blankness. The master of Samsara Palace, who forced that sword move, was doomed. More than half of the 12 super masters of the Samsara Palace were dead or injured. Even Flaming Fire's life and death were uncertain. Countless core masters, core strength, and a large number of trump cards of the Samsara Palace were revealed. The master of Samsara Palace might have succeeded. Tomorrow might be a new era. But everything of the Samsara Palace would be buried at the end of the old era, and completely destroyed with her success. Under such circumstances, Qin Weibai only showed blankness. Wang Tianzong didn't even see the slightest anger and hatred in her eyes. Her blankness was not even because of the destruction of the Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong felt that Qin Weibai was completely at a loss because of some concerns, or the blankness after the shadow suddenly disappeared. Wang Tianzong suddenly felt that she was a little strange. She narrowed her eyes and said calmly, "Who are you?" "Me?" Qin Weibai was obviously stunned for a moment. She thought of the sword light just now and the master of Samsara Palace. She suddenly became a little angry, and her voice became sharp. "Why do you question my identity?" "I didn't question anything," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "It's just that you seem to have lost yourself." "I am me," Qin Weibai said coldly. "Do you need me to introduce myself?" Wang Tianzong smiled and shook his head. Tonight, he stood at the unprecedented peak of the dark world. It seemed that even his character had become calm and gentle. He withdrew all his killing intent and walked past Qin Weibai to the villa where Li Tianlan was recuperating. Qin Weibai followed him quietly without saying a word. Li Tianlan was still unconscious. His military uniform had been taken off, and his upper body was naked. The huge wound on his chest had stopped bleeding, and the elites of Samsara Palace were carefully cleaning the wound for him. Dongxing Rushi lay beside him, leaning close to Li Tianlan. She seemed to have fallen asleep. Wang Tianzong watched quietly. He suddenly reached out and touched Li Tianlan's wound, feeling the sword intent in it. The movement of the sword appeared clearly in his mind, and the wound appeared clearly in front of him. He looked at it for a long while and muttered to himself, "This move is really gentle." Qin Weibai looked at Wang Tianzong expressionlessly. She did not stop him from coming in, nor did she stop him from touching Li Tianlan. From beginning to end, she was indifferent. Wang Tianzong finally turned around, looked at Qin Weibai, and asked, "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill him?" Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes. She had been a little confused, but suddenly there was an indescribable coldness in her. This was a feeling that Wang Tianzong was very familiar with. He didn't meet Qin Weibai much, but almost every time, he felt this coldness from Qin Weibai. Wang Tianzong shook his hand. The sword energy was flowing in his palm, which was extremely delicate. "Do you dare?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. The sword energy in his palm suddenly stagnated. Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. "I don't dare." "Do you dare?" Qin Weibai asked in an indifferent tone. Wang Tianzong fell silent. Qin Weibai stopped talking. In any case, Li Tianlan was the marshal of Zhongzhou state at this time. When the devil troop attacked this manor, Li Tianlan could die. Because there was no evidence that the devil troop belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. But now, Wang Tianzong was here, and Li Tianlan must not die. In a sense, from the moment Wang Tianzong entered this manor, Li Tianlan and Dongxing Rushi were really safe. Passing through the battlefield and the ruins, Wang Tianzong seemed to be moving forward step by step, but in fact, he was constantly retreating. "You won." The mountain-like killing intent and sword energy surged around Wang Tianzong for a moment. He became quiet again. "We didn't win, and you didn't lose." Qin Weibai shook her head. Maybe the ending was doomed from the beginning. Wang Tianzong didn't speak. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was lying on the bed with a pale face, with some regret in his eyes. There were many kinds of regrets. And all the regrets seemed to gather in Wang Tianzong's eyes at this time. He raised his hand and put it down again. He was silent for a long time. Qin Weibai, who had been standing in silence, watched him become quieter and quieter, and finally said, "See the guests out." Two elites of Samsara Palace came over and bowed slightly in silence and respect. Wang Tianzong shook his head and turned to leave. His figure paused at the door and suddenly said, "I will get what I want." "You have got it," Qin Weibai said calmly, "and we have got what we want." The new era? From now on. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and nodded. In the final sword move, both sides paid a heavy price. No one lost, no one won. In many cases, this was the world. What could they do even if they were unwilling? He walked out of the villa. Under the extremely clear night with the fragrance of flowers and plants, the unconscious Li Guangtu and Li Shi were carried back. Lin Fengting was also lying on the stretcher. His eyes were open, and he was still awake. Wang Tianzong looked calm and didn't even look at Li Guangtu. He walked to Lin Fengting and suddenly asked, "How is it?" "I won't die." Lin Fengting's tone was quiet, and his smile was still free and easy. Wang Tianzong looked at his eyes and said softly with emotion, "I can't go back." Lin Fengting nodded and said, "Yes. From now on." He looked at Lin Fengting and said softly, "It's better to be a stranger. If I can't, I won't." Lin Fengting took over his words, and his voice was extremely decisive. Wang Tianzong smiled. It was better to be a stranger. His figure walked out of the manor and said quietly, "It's best." The two brushed past each other and went in the opposite direction. In the villa, Qin Weibai came out to greet him. She bowed to Lin Fengting and said softly, "Thank you, sir." Lin Fengting took a deep look at her and shook his head. In the silent and quiet villa, Li Tianlan was still lying with his eyes closed. Lin Fengting struggled to get up from the stretcher, walked to Li Tianlan, and looked at him for a long time. When he really wakes up, what will happen? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. "I don't know." Qin Weibai shook her head, and her eyes became complicated and a little uneasy. "The real doomsday is nothing more than that," Lin Fengting muttered to himself. "The doomsday?" Qin Weibai was a little confused. "His, yours, and maybe everyone's." "The real doomsday," Lin Fengting said softly, and his eyes gradually became a little blank. Mount Dibbing. The sun was shining brightly. In the extremely quiet palace, Summer Solstice quietly watched everything happening on the screen. In the Beihai Corps in Eastern Europe, countless signals locked on Wang Tianzong and Mormons. Summer Solstice did not see the sword tear the sky, but she completely saw the sword shatter the whole city. Infinite brilliant light lingered on the screen and eventually disappeared. She saw Wang Tianzong, who was almost unscathed, appear in the city of Mormons. She saw Wang Tianzong kill Tyrant with a wave of his hand and take back the indefinite grace. She saw Wang Tianzong's figure moving forward, getting farther and farther away. In the quiet hall, Summer Solstice stood quietly like a statue. After an unknown period of time, her somewhat numb body slowly moved. The picture on the screen had been fixed. It was fixed on the screen without the Sword Emperor. Summer Solstice slowly turned around. Her expression was only calm, without any fluctuation. She opened the door of the palace, and the bright sun shone down. Summer Solstice raised her head and looked straight at the scorching sun in the sky. In the dazzling light, her eyes were red, and she did not know when she had burst into tears. Sparkling tears rolled down her cheeks. Summer Solstice walked out of the palace and into the depths of Mount Dibbing. Along the way, countless guards bowed at the same time when they saw her. Summer Solstice was in a trance. She passed by the World Palace. She boarded the stage of Formidable Person. The dense steps went all the way up and seemed to extend to the end of the sky and the sea. Summer Solstice took out her mobile phone and dialed a number. "Madam," on the phone, a respectful voice sounded. "Prepare a special plane." Summer Solstice's voice was soft and ethereal. "Okay." On the other side of the phone, the respectful voice answered, "Madam, where are you going?" Summer Solstice held the phone and looked to the north. "To Snow Country." She looked to the north, and an imperceptible sharpness was slowly gathering in her eyes. The woman who had amazed an era and might even become a female chosen one stood in front of the steps near the top of the stage of Formidable Person. She reached out her hand. The sword intent spread. Crack, the thick stone steps suddenly collapsed. The clear sound of the sword resounded throughout Mount Dibbing. The quaint long sword flew out of the stone steps and fell into Summer Solstice's white palm. Summer Solstice lowered her head and looked at the long sword in her hand. Her eyes were full of affection. More than 20 years ago, it was this sword that opened a path for the Wang family of Beihai in a difficult situation. In the case of treason more than 20 years ago, it was this sword that directly smashed the murderous weapon of the Li family, Infinite Sky. More than 20 years ago. In the past countless years, the Wang family of Beihai had a legend about this sword. But in this era, this was Summer Solstice's sword. The famous sword of Beihai. Autumn Water. Summer Solstice held the sword body of Autumn Water and turned to leave. Summer Solstice's personal maid knelt in front of the first step of the stage of formidable person. She held a mobile phone in her hand. "Madam," the maid whispered, "it's a call from His Majesty." Summer Solstice was stunned. She held the sword in one hand and took the mobile phone in the other. The moment she took the mobile phone, she hung up. A text message was sent quickly. "Stay at home and wait for me." Summer Solstice lowered her head and looked at the screen, looking at the typo on the screen. Autumn Water trembled slightly. She was silent, and her eyes turned red again. Chapter 606. The city in the distance gradually fell silent in the darkness. The cold wind howled in the north of Snow Country, and the waves on the seaside were surging. On the road not far from the seaside, the first batch of Snow Country soldiers who had withdrawn from Mormons had gradually gone away. The noise on the coastline in the wilderness disappeared, and everything became quiet again in the night. The usual silence did not last long before it was completely broken. A very clear shadow appeared on the sea level in the distance. The shadow rode the wind and waves in the ocean and approached quickly. The loud roar kept getting clearer. In the vague darkness, one after another behemoth rushed from the deep sea to the shoal. The bright and dazzling searchlights covered the whole coast. In the blazing white light, the star flag of Zhongzhou State was fluttering in the wind, which was extremely cold. One after another, the latest landing ships of Zhongzhou State rushed directly to the beach. The drones took off from the deck of the landing ships and flew into the night sky. In the noise, a large number of elite soldiers of Zhongzhou State rushed up with supplies. The chaotic and orderly crowd continued to extend on the beach, and more people appeared. A simple base had taken shape in the shortest time. A middle-aged man in a major general's military uniform looked around in the crowd with a serious expression. From the moment they landed until now, it had been quiet all around. The entire Snow Country seemed to have no reaction to their arrival. The Major General frowned. His figure suddenly stood somewhere on the beach and muttered to himself, "It's a little abnormal." "General, most of the military forces of Snow Country are involved in Mormons. After Jia Delin's death, the military of Snow Country is even more chaotic. Even if they can find us, they should not be able to react in a short time," a colonel said calmly. The Major General nodded and looked as usual, but the muscles at the corners of his eyes were twitching slightly. "In this case, report the local situation to General Nan immediately. Go north to support Mormons, or go south to join Marshal Dongcheng, and ask him to make a decision early." The colonel froze for a moment and looked at the Major General with a strange look in his eyes. The Major General waved his hand impatiently, and his body became more and more stiff. "Go." He pointed to another officer. "You go together." The two officers looked at each other for a moment, then turned around and walked toward the landing ship that was about to board. The Major General stood there quietly until the two subordinates walked away. Then he quietly lowered his head and looked at the beach under his feet. The waves rose and fell, the tides rose and fell. Under the night sky, the beach was suffused with a kind of deep darkness. In his line of sight, all the fine grains of sand seemed to be trembling slightly with a subtle and exquisite power. It looked light, but it carried a sharpness that far exceeded the limits of the Major General's imagination. The Major General narrowed his eyes and observed his surroundings. He silently took a step back. A black cloth appeared in front of him. A subtle flow of air surged around his body, and soon, the silhouette of a human figure appeared on the beach beneath his feet. The Major General buried the black cloth well, squatted down quietly, and reached out to flatten the sand. A pale face emerged from the mud. His eyes were tightly shut, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Amidst the bustling voices around him, the Major General's expression became extremely complicated. The moment he boarded the landing ship, he sensed a subtle but extremely sharp sword chi. This extremely sharp sword energy covered the whole beach, and countless grains of sand rose and fell gently under this killing intent. Although the rank of the Major General was not high among the higher-ups, his strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was definitely not weak. He came here by following the sword energy scattered on the beach. Even he did not expect that he would step on a corner of the black robe. To be precise, it was a palm. The palm of the owner of the face in front of him. The Major General looked at him with a complicated expression. The aura of the unconscious figure was extremely weak, and his vitality was almost constantly flowing from his body. But his vitality was so strong that he had been in this state for a long time, but he had never died. The Major General opened his mouth and muttered to himself, "You're really lucky." He didn't know why the other party was in a coma here or even submerged in sand, nor did he know what he had experienced. But these were not important. What was important was that what he saw in front of him was absolutely a great contribution to him. What he needed to do was very simple. It was so simple that he only needed to move his hands and turn the person in front of him into a real corpse, and then he could rise to the top in one step. It was just killing a person. He had done it too many times. How hard was it? The Major General's fingers touched his waist little by little. He held the special military bayonet of Zhongzhou State tightly in his hand. He was short of breath, and his eyes were red with excitement. It was like facing a pie that fell from the sky. They logged in here. The so-called senior officer was the first to log in and inspect the surrounding environment. Then he saw the other party submerged in the sand. What a coincidence. The other party's body was still under the sand. At this moment, no one could see his face except from this angle. He only needed to pierce the other party's heart through this layer of sand with the general bayonet. What was waiting for him would be endless glory, splendor, and wealth. The military bayonet in his hand fell down. A pistol that had obviously been specially modified and overly strengthened was pressed against the back of his head. "What are you doing?" A cold and hard voice sounded behind him. It was not an inquiry, but an interrogation. The Major General's body suddenly became stiff. His body turned around bit by bit, and in a short period of time, his mind had already become a blank. "General Nan." "No. Commander Nan, I'm asking you." The pistol was pressed against the back of his head, and the hard voice was filled with killing intent. "What are you doing?" "I found a wounded person of unknown origin. His identity is very suspicious, so you sent away your two subordinates to observe alone? You don't know him?" Commander Nan's voice became colder and colder. The Major General broke out in a cold sweat. His face never turned around, but his eyes had become calm. "Yes, I haven't seen him," and, bang! A loud roar like a cannon suddenly sounded in Commander Nan's hand. The loud sound rolled across the whole beach with a sound wave. The Major General's head and even his upper body were completely blown up. Blood and minced meat splashed out under the night sky, with extreme blood and violence. The soldiers who were busy carrying military supplies from the landing ship were stunned. Not only the soldiers, but even several middle-level and high-level officers around Commander Nan were stunned in place. "General Nan." "No, Commander Nan, what do you mean?" A senior colonel looked at the Major General whose upper body was blown up dully, and his face turned red. "Major General Chen Haiyang, the commander of the 9th Fleet of the Beihai Corps." At this moment, nearly half of the people who landed on this beach were elites of the 9th Fleet of the Beihai Corps. No one could have thought that their commander would be shot in the head as soon as the fleet landed. How could this be a headshot? It was simply a dismembered corpse. Isn't the meaning very clear? Commander Nan turned his head and looked at him expressionlessly. "What don't you understand?" In the darkness, the tall man's face was hard and cold, and his eyes were shining like a wild lion's. Covered in blood, he played with the pistol in his hand, looking more and more dangerous. The senior colonel who questioned him turned redder and redder, but he really didn't dare to say anything for a while. His eyes fell on the pistol in Commander Nan's hand, and the fear deep in his eyes became more and more obvious. In a sense, this pistol was as famous as Commander Nan himself in Zhongzhou State. It could be said to be the only pistol in the dark world whose range exceeded most sniper rifles, reaching almost 5,000 meters. It could even be said to be a hand cannon. The pistol was codenamed Jingzhe. Its superpower and super long range could almost only be controlled by Commander Nan alone. This pistol, which took the Dongqing clan several years to build, was completely deformed because Jingzhe had almost no accurate trajectory. As a pistol, it could only be shot once. Its huge shortcomings and great power were two extremes, just like Commander Nan's character. General Nan. The deputy commander of Zhongzhou State Navy Command, Dongqing Wudi's former personal secretary, was born in the Border Control Corps and had a brilliant resume. His brilliant experience made countless people call him Little God of Massacre. However, in more people's hearts, General Nan was called Crazy Nan. If General Nan hadn't been transferred out of the Border Control Corps for serious violations of military discipline in a border conflict a few years ago, he could even be said to be the best candidate to take over as the commander after Dongqing Wudi left the Border Control Corps. As soon as Dongqing Wudi marched into Snow Country, General Nan mobilized the 5th Fleet of Zhongzhou State stationed in the northeast and forcibly enlisted the 9th Fleet of the Beihai Corps to march into Snow Country by sea and land. The 9th Fleet did not resist. At this moment, standing on the land of Snow Country, even if General Nan killed the commander of the 9th Fleet, no one in the 9th Fleet dared to resist. The sky was high and the Emperor was far away. General Nan was in power. Who was willing to provoke this crazy? General Nan waved his hand. The sand and sand on the ground flew. The figure hidden under the sand and sand completely appeared in front of everyone. That black robe was completely torn, and the exposed skin of the man in black was full of cracks. The wounds had already turned white, and blood was no longer flowing. The injuries that were enough to kill him only made him faint. His aura was becoming weaker and weaker, but his aura could still be considered stable. General Nan looked down at him, then at the senior colonel who looked a little confused, and sneered. You entered the thunder-shocking realm at such an old age. I can imagine how bad your aptitude was when you were young. I'm not surprised that you don't know him. But Chen Haiyang doesn't know him? A few years ago, he respectfully called this man his instructor in Yuzhou. Chen Haiyang said he didn't know him. Do you think I believe it? He waved his hand and said forcefully and domineeringly, Chen Haiyang committed treason and was executed on the spot. This matter can be reported to the army headquarters now. If the Beihai Corps has any different opinions, let your commander come to me in person. In the silence, Commander Nan's tone became furious. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and carry His Highness onto the ship. Treat him immediately, at any cost. Looking at the so-called Highness who was washed here from an unknown sea area, several officers behind General Nan instantly came to their senses. They carefully lifted his body and ran to the landing ship not far away. General Nan stood where he was and glanced coldly at the body on the ground. He casually kicked his lower body away, took out his mobile phone, and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected. General Nan, who was domineering a minute ago, had become extremely respectful. His voice was still strong. General, I have landed outside Olan City. Give me a day, no, 15 hours, and we will meet in Kamas. You, on the phone, Dongqing Wudi's voice seemed to be smiling bitterly. General, you shouldn't have come. General Nan froze for a moment and didn't know what to say. It was Dongqing Wudi's order for him to come here. General Nan touched his head. Has the situation changed? Nothing. Dongqing Wudi whispered, it's our concern that makes us confused. In fact, I shouldn't have come. His voice seemed a little embarrassed and annoyed. "Since we are here, Snow Country has no choice." Chapter 607. The sky gradually brightened. The first ray of sunlight shone on the Snow Kingdom's palace. The palace warriors, who had been tense all night, subconsciously relaxed. Tension and fatigue spread to every corner of the palace, and every palace warrior's face was filled with sleepiness that could not be concealed. The palace warriors began to change shifts. In the strict and hurried handover between the two sides, the tense atmosphere was maintained. The tense atmosphere in the palace spread, and the capital of the Snow Kingdom, which used to be extremely prosperous, looked unusually quiet at this time. A serious and cold atmosphere permeated every corner of the city. Under the morning sun, Kamas looked like he was ready to welcome the end of the world at any time. The end of the world never came. But the prelude had already begun. The central hall in the depths of the palace had been temporarily converted into a simple morning hall. Bathed in the morning sun, the body of the Snow Kingdom's president Jia Delan was escorted back to Kamas by several middle-level officers, and entered the Snow Kingdom's palace. At this time, all the high-level officials of the Snow Kingdom in Kamas had arrived. The Prime Minister of the Snow Kingdom, Margarero, dressed in a black formal suit, stood at the forefront, looking at the body covered by the flag of the Snow Kingdom, in a daze. The best forensic doctor in the Snow Kingdom had already carefully observed Jia Delan's body in the shortest time possible. At this time, he stood beside the Prime Minister and reported in a low voice. "The cause of death is unknown. The President's body seemed to have suffered an extremely serious freeze at the moment of death. Preliminary observation shows that the low temperature completely sealed all the pores on the President's body in an instant, but his internal organs showed signs of burning. It was very strange, as if someone had ignited a raging fire in his body while freezing the President. The extreme cold and extreme heat worked at the same time, and directly took away the President's life." The forensic doctor said carefully, his voice full of confusion. He had never seen such a bizarre death. Two extreme temperatures acted on a person's body at the same time. This was like the strongest poison in the world, and almost no one could withstand the torture at that moment. "You've worked hard." Margarero nodded, his eyes filled with sadness from the bottom of his heart. The relationship between Jia Delan and Margarero was not harmonious. Jia Delan, who was born in the wealthy Violet family, often thought about the rise of the entire Snow Empire, while Margarero, who was born as a commoner, thought about the overall economy of the Snow Empire. Therefore, most of the time, he was more like the spokesperson of the wealthy families of the Snow Empire. But at this moment, with Jia Delan's strange death, all the grudges had been put down. The strong man who stood at the commanding heights of the regime suddenly collapsed. The sky above the Snow Country seemed to have lost a solid barrier all of a sudden. Wind and rain mixed with fierce momentum whistled over at the same time. Even Margarero could not adapt to such a change in a short period of time. Until the next election, he would bear the pressure of the President as the Prime Minister. How could it be so easy to take the power of the President during a time of war? Margarero thought for a whole night, but he still could not figure out the future path of Snow Country. "You are the best forensic doctor in Snow Country." The Prime Minister looked at the forensic doctor, who was no longer young, and said calmly, "I believe in your professional abilities. We must find out the cause of President Jia Delan's death as soon as possible. This is a political mission, understand?" The forensic doctor nodded with a determined expression. The Prime Minister looked at him for a long time, and then sighed softly. The war broke out too suddenly. Snow Country started the war with absolute superiority, but no one had expected such an ending. As the President, Jia Delan died inexplicably on the way to Reki City. Until now, the reason had not been found out. Now everyone in Snow Country was angry, and Dongqing Wudi's army was still ready to move. All of this made Snow Country's momentum continue to decline. The decision to completely abandon Mormons was personally issued by Margarero. At least in his eyes, with Jia Delan's death, whether Snow Country could survive was a problem, not to mention winning the war. What Snow Country needed most now was to recuperate. The corner of Margarero's mouth moved. Before he could speak, a military staff officer had rushed into the hall. He lowered his voice and said something quickly in Margarero's ear. Margarero's face kept changing. After a long time, he took a deep breath and seemed to have made up his mind. Everyone. He calmly glanced at all the high-level officials in the hall. I just received the news that Dongqing Wudi's Black Dragon army set off 2 hours ago, and 15 minutes ago, Oris fell. Boom! The atmosphere in the whole hall almost completely exploded in an instant. The news that Dongqing Wudi had stopped to rest a few hundred miles away from Kamas had made them a little relaxed. But when the news came, everyone realized that Dongqing Wudi really had no scruples and was determined to attack Kamas. Oris City was less than 100 kilometers away from Kamas. In other words, maybe in a few hours, the Black Dragon Army's vanguard would reach Kamas. Destruction was close at hand, and no one could remain calm. There's another news. Margarero said blandly, the military has confirmed many times that 2 fleets of the Zhongzhou State Navy have landed in Orinda City, with about 30,000 people. That's the only way to retreat from Mormons. At this moment, the 30,000 elites of these 2 fleets have defeated about 60,000 of our retreating troops. And the other side still has no intention of giving up the fight. The other side is led by General Nan of Zhongzhou State. In other words, we can't count on the reinforcements that we hope to withdraw from Mormons to support Kamas. There was a lot of discussion. In the extremely noisy environment, the faces of the high-level officials of Snow Country finally showed unconcealable panic. Mr. Prime Minister, what do you suggest? You can say it now. In the chaotic discussion, an old marshal of Snow Country who had retired stood up and looked into Margarero's eyes. Suggestion? We can't resist. What else can I suggest? Everyone can guess what will happen to Snow Country in the future. Maybe it will be miserable, but this is the only way. No matter how miserable it is, it's much better than Snow Country not existing, isn't it? Margarero smiled bitterly. The old marshal didn't speak, just looked at him quietly. Very good. Margarero shrugged and said, since no one wants to say it, I'll say it. Everyone, the only way to survive so far is to sue for peace, just like, he turned on the screen in the hall. The Eastern European news was showing the carnival in Reki City. Prime Minister Rieker of Wulan State was giving a speech. Margarero looked at Rieker on the screen with indifferent eyes. Just like Prime Minister Rieker? The old marshal took the initiative to speak. No. Margarero shook his head. He stared at Rieker on the screen, as if he could clearly see the fear and despair in the depths of his heart. I'll sue for peace, but I won't be like him. Margarero laughed. But Dongqing Wudi's conditions must be very harsh. The old marshal frowned. Yes. Margarero nodded and said in a cold voice, so we don't need to talk to Dongqing Wudi. At this stage, we have a better choice. He was silent for a moment and said, I've sent someone to Mormons. The atmosphere in the whole hall froze for a moment. The old marshal's face changed slightly, and he said in a dry voice, Wang Tianzong? We're going to the Wang family of Beihai? Judging from his performance tonight, he and his Wang family of Beihai are qualified to cover Snow Country under his sharpness. Margarero's tone was calm. The old marshal was silent for a long time and finally did not speak. The high-level officials of Snow Country did not speak either. Margarero looked in the direction of Mormons with calm eyes. The Wang family of Beihai would never refuse Snow Country's surrender. They belonged to Zhongzhou State. But in many cases, they were completely different from Zhongzhou State. For Snow Country, this was the best choice. For the Wang family of Beihai, they had the entire Snow Country and would also occupy a great initiative in Eastern Europe. Perhaps their strength would not be stronger than Li Tianlan in an instant, but in the future of Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai with Snow Country would also have great influence. In a sense, between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai, whoever could absorb their own territory faster could become the future king of Eastern Europe. Margarero was in a daze. He had begun to think about the difficult steps to survive under the wings of the king. When he left the manor and returned to Mormon's, Wang Tianzong's aura had calmed down. The extremely powerful sharpness between heaven and earth was everywhere. His arms, which were hidden in the wide sleeves of his robe, were trembling slightly. The voices of surrender continued around him. Those who did not choose to kneel also stayed where they were. They seemed to have lost all hope and did not even want to think about retreating. Wang Tianzong watched all this quietly. The elites of the Beihai court gathered in his sight and walked over. All he could feel in their eyes was almost fanatical worship. Wang Tianzong suddenly felt very tired. He raised his arm reluctantly and whispered, "Gather, we." The roaring sound of the rotors interrupted his words. A helicopter of the latest model of Snow Country rushed directly into the battlefield. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and looked at the helicopter in the air. His eyes were playful and he was silent. The helicopter barely chose a relatively flat area to land. The hatch opened. A general of Snow Country rushed down against the strong airflow of the helicopter's rotors and came to Wang Tianzong. "Your Majesty." The general of Snow Country stopped less than 5 meters away from Wang Tianzong and bowed deeply. "What's the matter?" Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. "The Prime Minister has something very important to discuss with you. If your Majesty has time, can you?" "I don't have time." Wang Tianzong interrupted the general of Snow Country and said calmly, "I don't want to see your Prime Minister either. If Margarero really has something important, let him come to see me." He walked past the general and went to the Beihai court. The general seemed a little surprised. He hesitated and said, "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister is very sincere." "Then let him come to see me." Wang Tianzong nodded and kept walking. "Where are you going?" The general smiled bitterly. Wang Tianzong paused and said calmly, "I want to go home. I'm not in the right state these days. I'm seriously stuck and the keyboard has a problem. It's hard to type. The new keyboard will arrive tomorrow. I'll adjust it and try to break out next month." You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.